Let me ask, the movie Leave the World Behind, which was produced by the Obamas, paints a pretty distressing picture of how you could turn America against itself in 3 easy steps. Step 3 being civil war. How easy do you think it is in reality to destabilize the US or any other major country?
I love that you start with this question, and I love that you didn't give me any hints that you were going to start with this question, because I recently watched Leave the World Behind, and I thought it was just a brilliant piece of the human experience, right? First of all, to answer your question directly, destabilizing the United States would be very difficult, because at the end of the day, the US we are a strong unifying culture. When we are attacked, it supersedes all other things. We saw that with 9/11. We saw it in the Vietnam War. We saw it time and time again, right? When we are attacked, it unifies us. It's not the same cultural response every country has. So if we were to see a large scale hack, if TVs were to suddenly go down, radios were to suddenly go down, if the whole network and infrastructure started to fall apart, if Teslas started self-driving themselves and blocking roads, the last thing we would do is start killing each other. If anything, we would all unify, because at our core, we are a fighting culture. It's one of our biggest flaws and one of our biggest strengths. We are a warring culture here in the United States. Now, that said, the part of the movie that to me was so prescient was that instead of us having one enemy, we faced a unity force of enemies that were all collaborating and coordinating the attack together. So that's what the movie's premise was, right? What if it wasn't one bad guy? What if it was an amalgam of people who don't like you? Essentially, what if 10 bullies attacked you instead of one bully? I think that is getting to the heart of what conflict really looks like now, and what conflict will look like for the United States for the next generation.
Tell me more about that. I've heard you talk about this. You've said something that unfortunately rings a little too true to me, which is that World War III has already begun. If that's true, it certainly doesn't feel like it. So what do you mean by that? What do you think World War III will or does look like?
So it's interesting that you say that, because when I hear people say it doesn't feel like World War III has started, World War II, when it started, also didn't feel like World War II had started for America. If you recall, America didn't get involved in World War II until after all of Europe had basically been ingested by the Nazi Party. Only after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor did World War II start being felt by Americans. World War III is very similar. What we're seeing right now is a whole-scale attack on American resources, the US dollar, American influence, American dominance. And any war is really about bringing your opponent down in terms of influence and power, and at the same time increasing your own influence and power. Where World War III looks different than World War II is that World War III is being fought through these proxy wars, third country battles, oftentimes poor or impoverished battles that are being bankrolled by large world leaders. If you look at Libya, if you look at Syria, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Yemen, all these fit the proxy war model. And those are just major conflicts. There are minor conflicts happening all over Asia, Latin America, and South America, or Latin America and Africa, that show even more active involvement by the United States, the Russians, the Chinese, North and South Koreans, Turks, Germans, waging conflict through third countries all over the planet. And what are they fighting for? What makes it worthwhile for the United States to engage in a conflict against the Houthis in Yemen? What makes it worth it for Iran to invest in the same conflict? The reason it's a good investment is because they are increasing their own influence and power without risking their own nationals or without risking their own military successes or failures. It's easier to fund a civil war from outside than it is to engage in what's known as interstate war, which is when your nation state invades another nation state, like we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, Civil War. It's the idea that really stood out to me in the movie Leave the World Behind, It's something I've thought a lot about. My audience has heard me talk ad nauseum about Ray Dalio's growing percentage prediction of civil war here in the US. It's interesting that you call us a warring culture, that we're very good at uniting, because we are also proving that we're very good at splitting almost exactly right down the middle, which I have a whole thesis about, which maybe we'll get into. But while I agree with you that I think the movie Leave the World Behind is just exceptionally unrealistic in terms of, it's like, oh, first isolation and just take out all their communications. No big deal. That would be brutally difficult. And of course, if somebody could, they would have already. But it's one of those where, from a movie perspective, the suspension of disbelief to point out a human truth, I think, is really prescient.
Yes.
I don't think it is accidental that the Obamas are behind this. Somebody that's been in the war room, somebody that really understands what the darker side of human nature can look like when nudged in the right direction. And it's very theatrical. I do not want anybody to think I'm saying, hey, that's a documentary on how this will go. Very much not. But once you grant them that, then you can look at, okay, when a country is divided, when people turn on themselves, it's the ultimate destabilizing factor. And when I look at, less so honestly with Russia and Ukraine, which may be my ignorance, but I don't think so, very much so with Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Palestine, depending on how you want to think about it, that one to me feels like they have an anchoring ideology which makes it effectively impossible for them to get along. And by leveraging that, you get some really dire consequences. And so we're seeing that play out in real life. And that to me is what they're playing with in the movie Leave the World Behind, is, okay, just grant me that they are divided. And now what does it look like once people begin turning on each other, tapping into the tribalism, tapping into this sense of wanting to protect you and yours. And that is an algorithm running in the human animal. And so when you, for people that haven't seen you before, which would be shocking at this point, but with your background as a CIA agent, how do you tap into that? Like, when I think about the velocity of information created by social media, my original intro for this episode that I wrote was that the internet really changed everything because it allows human psychology to play out in a different way. And the way that the internet allows human psychology to play out is it is so easy to confuse people. It is so easy to confuse people. And if I'm looking at, forget the movie, if I'm looking at what's really happening, I'm not even saying it's coordinated. I'm just saying that the velocity of information that comes across your social feed, where you have the algorithm from an AI perspective colliding with the AI that runs the human, any individual human. Yours is going to be different than the next person, but there's enough similarity that we can really get some flywheels going. But the velocity of information makes it very easy to confuse people, because people are extraordinarily bad at understanding a position from a nuanced place. And so if you were going to analyze the situation that we're in now, where you've got someone like Ray Dalio, who has a lot of credibility, in my opinion, saying, okay, likelihood of civil war is going up. You've got your own take that World War III is potentially already happening, that this is a proxy battle. We've got things popping off in the Middle East. We've got things popping off in Russia. How do we pour fuel on a fire that's already burning by confusing people with fast information?
So what's really interesting is you're exactly right that people get confused easily, and you're exactly right that velocity of information is a factor in that confusion. Where I would challenge, and I don't think you were saying this outright, but I want to make sure that nobody misunderstands, that velocity of information and confusion existed long before the internet, long before social media.
You don't, I will potentially take exception to that. And I will say that the velocity of information that you could get before would come from a narrow band of sources.
Correct.
And now the velocity of information not only is 100 times, 1,000 times faster, it is coming from 1,000 times more sources. And so it does feel unique, this moment.
I don't disagree with you. Yeah. I agree with you in terms of volume. It's velocity that I'm focusing on, right? Volume, absolutely. We have more information now and more channels and more avenues than ever before. But think about our parents. Our parents used to wait every day for the morning newspaper and for the 5 o'clock news. I remember my dad rushing home for the 5 o'clock news. Why? Because those 2 touch points were essentially the only time they had in an entire day to find out what was going on anywhere else. So when that 60-page newspaper landed on the doorstep on Sunday morning, that was everything. That was the holy grail for news for the week. So if you think about it in terms of velocity, as fast as you could read through those 60 pages, you got all your new information. Everything challenged what you previously knew, and everything set the stage for what you were going to assume until the next Sunday paper or until the next Monday local paper. Same thing with the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock news. You waited for that moment, and whatever update came in that 30-minute or 1 hour cycle became your foundation of truth for the next 24 hours. We live in a world now where their volume and the velocity combine. So now what you learn this second literally changes when your feed refreshes half a second later, right? So the volume is so different, and the velocity and the volume combined exacerbate the what I think you correctly call the confusion of information. This is another element when you ask me how I see this as a CIA officer. One of the core things that people don't understand is that in a covert influence campaign, I mean, that's for a CIA officer, covert influence is a tactical rule book. It's a recipe. Here's how you make it. You crack 2 eggs, you take 2 cups of sugar, and you melt some butter. That's how you make a cake. Covert influence campaign has 3 parts. One of those parts is simply creating information that contradicts other information that exists, not by creating something new, but by exacerbating something that's already believed. So you just take 2 existing narratives and you pour fuel on one of those narratives just to make it burn. And then as conflict erupts between these 2 narratives, then you pour fuel on the other narrative just to keep the fire going. And that's how you start a covert influence campaign. The goal of covert influence is not to get people to believe in something. It's to get them to get confused by everything so that you can create general chaos, because chaos degrades the ability for unification. That's the real goal behind covert influence.
How real is the threat of covert influence?
It's not even a threat. It's a guarantee. It's happening all the time. It's happening everywhere around us all the time. So organized, disorganized, intentional, unintentional, state-run, transnational, government-sponsored, U.S.-sponsored. Covert influence is happening everywhere all the time.
In 2016, I wasn't paying attention to it. I'll be honest. I was just building. And I was very sort of caught off guard in that moment of a sense of, oh, wow, like even whether or not Russia was actually engaging in trying to influence the election, I had never considered that somebody would try to influence the election. And so it made me go, wait a second, like that's actually, again, whether true or not, it's a plausible, it might even be smart to think about how government agencies are using PR or propaganda, however you want to look at it, to influence what people think. And then on the back of all this, I start reading about history. And the more I read about history, the more I get really concerned about how things can and do go off the rails in the most violent, horrifying ways possible. And all of a sudden, it felt important to pay attention, not necessarily to be overly paranoid. And the last thing I want to do is beat the drum of like, hey, everybody, you need to panic. No one should panic.
Right.
But as you will have heard in my intro to this episode, if you want to win the game of life, you're going to need to pay attention to the players and the pieces and the real essence of the game that's being played. What I would love is for you to walk out using this moment that we're in, where we're building towards an election, and there's at a minimum going to be just very straightforward, simple desire to influence the voting public to voting for a given candidate. Let's even just assume it's all above board. It's no one's trying to be, it's not a foreign government. It's just people are going to try to sway your way of thinking. How can people anchor themselves to something so that they can think through this problem well. You and I talked about this last time we were together. That to me is the whole shtick. Whether you want to be a good parent, whether you want to be a good partner in a relationship, whether you want to be a great entrepreneur, you must be able to think through novel problems well. How?
So one of the things I always get excited about and discouraged by is that your questions are so good and there's so many elements inside each question that we could pick apart. So like with what you just said, with what you just asked about how do we handle this well? Prior to that, you started talking about kind of becoming aware of influence in 2016. Prior to that, you mentioned Palestine and Hamas interchangeably, right? What I see is in the question, you actually start to show how difficult it is to splice these things apart. Hamas and Palestine are two totally different things. The government of Hamas and the terrorist militant group of the Al-Qassam Brigade within Hamas is completely different than the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah government, right? Those are all, but all of those are part of Palestine.
So just to put it in the context of where I'm steering us, so trying to understand how to think through a problem well, which we are all faced with, you have two options. Put your head down, you will be used as a pawn. Pick your head up, pay attention, you can hopefully navigate this well. What I hear you saying is you have to accurately map out what is really happening. So in this case, and I wasn't trying to say that they're indistinguishable. What I was trying to say is some people will talk about Hamas, other people will talk about Palestine. So however you want to think about that.
Right.
But getting an understanding of what is actually happening, or an accurate assessment of the players, the pieces is how I typically refer to it. Is that where you're going? Like you just have to really map the terrain?
Yeah, well, that's where I'm starting from. That's where I'm starting from for sure. Because even when you talk about the 2016 elections and how the whole world woke up to the fact that influence was happening in 2016, but nobody seems to ask the question of if we caught it in 2016, how many previous elections where it happened that we didn't catch it? And why would we ever think that any of our elections were ever safe from covert influence? Just because we didn't have social media, or just because Facebook wasn't a giant in 2008, why do we think we didn't also experience something then too? So the starting point to answer your question, the starting point is to understand that emotional decision-making is what the human brain wants to do. It wants to make emotional decisions because emotional decisions require less cognitive ability, less calories, less time. It's so much easier to just fall back on what you were conditioned as a kid to believe, what you have experienced as an adult, what your opinions are, what your friends say. It's just the easiest, fastest way to make a decision. The brain is inherently very conservative of its energy. We often joke that the brain is lazy. So the brain just jumps to conclusions. And when you give it a way of jumping to a conclusion, it likes that. It's like muscle memory. I'm a Christian, therefore I'm pro-life. So anytime you bring up anything Christian, I'm going to say pro-life. The brain loves that because it saves all this analysis and contextualizing and synthesis and information vetting. It saves itself all that trouble by just jumping to a conclusion. So you see information is presented to you in what form? In a way that triggers an emotional response. Even to your point about the whole, like Palestine and Hamas are presented in a way where it's hard to distinguish the difference between the two. I completely agree. The reason they are presented that way is to make it easy for the human brain in the target audience to leap to the conclusion that Palestine is Hamas. Hamas is Palestine. They are the same, which makes everything happening in Israel right now under the rubric of terrorism. If that's the narrative you want to portray, it's easy to get there when you don't differentiate, when you don't use subtlety and nuance to explain your information. As soon as you start to dig into the information, as soon as you start to map the battlefield, you start to see all the changes in the terrain. You start to see the tree line. You start to see the sand pits. You start to see the areas that are high ground and highest ground, and how they're different from the low ground and the lowest ground. Right. So it takes that level of awareness to be able to really land on a meaningful decision. So the first thing to understand is that we decide, you, me, the smartest people, the dumbest people. It's irrelevant of your race, age, creed, or education level. we all, pink matter, brain matter, decide first and easily through emotions, through an emotional lens. It's sometimes called emotional reasoning. Emotion and reasoning are two different things. But when you reason through a lens of emotion, it's a cognitive distortion that we call emotional reasoning. Understanding that is kind of the first step.
Yeah, no doubt. So I have a big bumper sticker that I try to get people to take in for this very reason. So I agree. You have to map the terrain. You have to understand what's actually going on. You have to distrust yourself. That's my bumper sticker.
That's a great bumper sticker.
Because you can't make decisions without emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So literally, if you selectively damage the area of the brain that's in charge of emotions, people can give you all the reasons why fish is better than beef. And then they still, in the end, they can't make a decision, because without the ability to process emotion, to push in one direction or another, you literally, I don't mean this like as an analogy, you literally can't make a decision without emotion. The bad news is that your emotions are influenced by your frame of reference. So everything that happened to you from the time you were a little kid, whatever, until today, like all of it creates the context that will trigger an emotion. Now, the problem is the emotion, to your point, makes the decision feel obvious. And so you context plus the whatever happens creates emotion. Emotion makes one decision obvious over the other, but that doesn't mean it's the quote unquote right decision. Okay, so you have mapped the terrain, you have understand the way the pink matter is working, that you're going to be making these decisions emotionally. What else goes into this? Remember, I'm trying to get people to your 2024 for sure is going to be brutal because this is an election year here in the US, because there are multiple wars going on. But just in general, if you can anchor yourself and think well through problems that you haven't seen before, you're going to do far better in life. So that is the umbrella under which I asked the question.
After you map the battlefield, I mean, to use a military parallel, after you map the battlefield, the next thing you need to do is take in all source intelligence. All source intelligence means you're accepting information from all sources.
How do you make sure you're not taking in biased sources, since every source is probably biased?
So because every source is biased, that's the assumption you have to have about every source. So the important thing is we're all accustomed to taking in certain trusted sources. Mom, dad, wife, husband, sisters, brothers, coworkers, whatever it might be. Maybe your trusted source is CNN, maybe your trusted source is Fox News, maybe your trusted source is BBC, maybe your trusted source is AP. We all have our trusted sources, but those trusted sources are all biased in some way. Whether it's a lean or a full-blown wing, we don't know, but everything's biased in some way. So the only way to offset the bias is to take in information from the opposite bias. Now, if you've ever been a Boy Scout, if you've ever done anything like land navigation, you can always identify where you are located by doing something called a reverse azimuth, casting a reverse azimuth. Have you ever heard of this?
What the hell is that?
So when you look on a compass and you point the compass at where you're trying to go, you're creating an azimuth, a direction. In reverse, if you're trying to find out where you are, you can find a landmark, a tall mountain, a building, a cathedral, a city, whatever else it might be. Aim your compass at the landmark, and now casting the reverse direction, you know where you are in comparison to the landmark. If you do that with two landmarks, those two landmarks have an intersection point, and now you know your true location. So a reverse azimuth in the information space means you listen to left-leaning news, but then you also listen to right-leaning news. Where they say the same thing, you have a high confidence that it's accurate. Where they say everything else doesn't necessarily mean either side is wrong. It's just starting to show you their bias. But what you have confidence in is where they agree. If you do that enough times, you start to have a foundation of truth. I know this to be true. I have high confidence that this is true because left-leaning and right-leaning news sources are saying this is happening. But then everything around it, what we would call the fog of war, everything around it is unknown. It's wrapped in fog. It hasn't been discovered yet. It hasn't been reported yet. It hasn't been stress tested or vetted yet. So it's a foggier area. It's an area of missing information. Vice your small pond or your small island of known information. And as it's difficult for most people to actually put it into practice because it slows the world down. Why does it slow the world down? Because your two biggest enemies are velocity and volume. Velocity and volume of information lead to confusion. So if you can decrease the volume and slow down the speed to identify the true facts, guess what you're fighting against? The very same confusion you're trying to overcome, right? A big part of the reason that Intel failures happen, a big part of the reason why Intel flaps and Intel mistakes happen is because professional intelligence officers try to slow things down and reduce the volume. Volume in terms of noise, but also volume in terms of mass, to find the true facts that we can make something meaningful out of. Well, sometimes in all the volume and all the speed, nuggets of intelligence that are super relevant find their way in, but you don't see them because they're hidden in the noise. That's how 9/11 happened. In many ways, that's how October 7th happened in Israel, right? Nuggets were hidden in the noise. And unfortunately, we didn't learn about that until after we had the time to do a post-analysis and look back on what happened.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
I think it was Sun Tzu that said, all of war is deception. So I also have to imagine that within the noise, there are a lot of nuggets that are placed erroneously on purpose, trying to point you in a completely different direction. Okay, one thing, is that the recipe for you, or is there more?
So great. So I would say the recipe is to get a sense of the battlefield, take in all sorts of intelligence, and then actually synthesize in addition to analyze the information. Analyzing.
Walk me yeah, okay. I think you're about to do what I was going to ask.
Analyzing the information means you take it in and you start to cross-reference it to see where it aligns.
Yep.
That's analyzing.
The disagreeing things, where they overlap.
Right. And then are you seeing trends? Right. That's all part of analysis. Synthesis then means that you take open gaps, open question marks, and you start to actively take steps to fill in those questions, to fill in those missing spots. So if you think of it, analysis is passive. Analysis is just taking what you find, taking what you get, and then creating a document or a grid that has gaps in it. And then you pass it to somebody and say, here's my analysis. We know these three things. We don't know these three things. Synthesis is, we know these three things. We don't know these three things, but here's how we will find the answer to these other missing spots. When you and I start to synthesize the information that we have, it starts to give us an active tool that we can use to collect information. We can go to people that we trust, people that we like talking to, people that we know are bigger thinkers or look beyond the noise, and we can start asking them their opinions. You get to do this every day on your show. You get to ask big questions of people that are advanced thinkers, and you get to inform your own opinion every step of the way. You are synthesizing every step of the way, every time you have one of these interviews. People who watch you are doing the same thing. They're synthesizing through you. They have gaps. They want those gaps filled. They trust you to help them fill those gaps. But you're not the only source. They have other people that they also learn from, other people that they also follow. The problem with our world, the problem with the United States in many ways, in my opinion, is a lack, not of analysis. It's a lack of synthesis. People accept the gaps and they assume what's happening in the gap instead of actively trying to solve the question of what's happening in the gap.
That's really interesting and I think super important. And again, abstracting it for people, it does not matter what problem you were trying to think through, whether it's Israel, Hamas, whether it is Ukraine, Russia, correct. Being a better parent, getting a promotion, starting a business, whatever. It's all going to run the same thing. The important part for me, so I use slightly different vernacular to describe exactly the same thing. So for me, it's frame of reference, getting people to understand that you have a frame of reference. You see the world in a certain way. You are awash in biases. You're awash in certain emotions that you have to things. So the way I explain it to an entrepreneur is your job as a CEO is the world is a bunch of dots, to your point. It's data analysis. You're getting a bunch of data in, but it doesn't actually tell a story by itself. You have to connect those dots. Now, much like when we look up into the night sky for millennia, people saw animals and humans and all kinds of things in the shapes of the stars. It's not really there.
Right.
Those are just dots. But we cannot help but from our frame of reference of being a human and the things that we know, overlay things onto those patterns in the same way that you'll see a dog in the clouds or the shape of England, which has happened to me many times because my wife happens to be from the UK. So we will begin to see patterns in the dots. And as a thinker, again, regardless of what you're aiming that thinking at, that's your job. Your job is to connect the dots, but you have to be hyper aware that emotions will make dots feel like they connect that don't actually connect.
Right.
And if you don't distrust yourself, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a dog's face. Oh yeah, that's whatever, Aries pulling back a bow and arrow in the sky. And people will just, yeah, 100%, that's what it is. I see the picture in the dots. And to think through a novel problem well, what you have to do is really step back and go, cool, I see a picture in this. I really have a strong take on what this is, but I know better. I cannot trust my emotions. They are probably making dots feel like they connect that don't actually connect. I need to step back because you have to have that certainty to move forward, right? Otherwise, you just be forever analysis paralysis. So I need a narrative that allows me to move forward, but I need to also occasionally check in and be like, I need to welcome disconfirming evidence because, and this is the part we haven't talked about yet that I think is insanely important and dear anybody listening that wants to think well through a problem, you must have a goal first.
Yeah.
Like for me, the way I think about when I get invited to be on a podcast is no one can make me say something I don't believe is true. And so I'll go on any podcast. Like the only thing they can hope to do is like really like snip, snip, snip and like rearrange things in an order. I am admittedly easy to make sound crazy out of context, but if somebody watches the whole thing, like it's gonna be there. So understanding that, okay, I can go listen to things that I think are outright lunacy that, you know, whether it's far right, far left, whatever, it's not going to poison my mind to hear it. To your point, it's going to help me triangulate when I understand where people disagree, what they're fighting over. And then that helps me refine the way that I'm connecting the dots so that I can hopefully get closer and closer to the truth. But the truth is my goal. Now, why the truth? How did the truth become my North Star when I'm looking at something like this? Because to me, the truth has utility, which completely reveals who I am and what I'm about. I'm about something being useful. Now, then it begs the question, useful in what way? And I think it is important to define that. And I think people should have goals that are honorable. To me, the best I can do, and if somebody has a better answer, I'm super here for it, but the best I can do so far is to say all humans ought, value judgment entirely, all humans ought to strive to maximize human flourishing and minimize human suffering as much as possible. I don't have a better one than that. That's clearly not perfect. The human experience does not seem to be perfect. But at least if you're doing that, like your real aim is, hey, as much as I can, I'm going to try to alleviate human suffering. I'm going to try to elevate people. We can get into definitions of what that stuff is about. I think it's beyond the scope of what we're saying now. But what I'm trying to get people to understand is you have to have a goal. Yeah. There needs to be a thing that you can state that you are steering towards so that as you redraw your dots, you're constantly asking what is more true in that. When I look at this problem with this particular connection of dots, it allows me to more accurately predict the outcome of my actions. Once you can predict the outcome of your actions, if I do this, I will get this outcome. That to me tells me that you're closer to ground truth. That's why as we learn more about physics, we're able to do more things. So Newtonian physics first gave us the ability to land on the moon, but it didn't give us the ability to do GPS. For that, we needed Einsteinian physics. So it's understanding that, as we get closer to truth, and even Einstein said, well, we still don't fully understand it. And as we do, we'll be able to do more things, whether that's harnessing the power of an entire sun or an entire galaxy, whatever. Like as we understand physics better, we will be able to do those things. So that is a very tangible example of the modern world was born out of us getting closer to ground truth. Now, when you were one step removed at Newtonian physics, you still could do amazing things because you were getting close enough to something true that you were able to do certain things, but there will be a wall. And so as your ability to predict the outcome of your actions breaks down, you should immediately go, interesting. The way I have drawn these dots is not accurate enough for me to get to that next stage. And so what piece of this is broken? And this is where I find people don't even realize they have a frame of reference. So they never think to like recheck. Like, hey, what's wrong with my way of thinking? Because I'm not making progress towards my goal. And therefore, by definition, I'm doing something quote unquote wrong, which people are going to get hung up on that word, but I'm doing something wrong. And therefore I have to update my set of beliefs in order to make additional progress.
So I love that you, again, in the way that I love sitting with you, you bring up a million, at least 5 different ways of looking at this question. So what I'm going to focus in on is this idea of truth. Because what you call truth, I associate with fact. And fact and truth seem like they should be the same thing, but they're different things. Because truth includes facts and beliefs, whereas facts excludes beliefs. And that, I think, was what you were getting at with the end of your question when you said that everybody looks through a lens of what they believe. So, for example, to go back to physics as an example, right? Copernicus was the one who suggested for the first time that maybe the Earth revolves around the sun. Everything before that was that everything revolved around the Earth, right? That was the facts that were known at the time. Even the world's astronomers at the time were able to map out the night sky and sunrises and sunsets and seasons back to the Earth. And then the Roman Catholic Church also aligned with the same belief system. Everything revolves around the Earth. So the truth and the predominant set of facts at the time pointed to the idea that everything revolved around the Earth. Copernicus proposed something different that wasn't actually a provable fact until Newton, right? Whatever that was, 100 years later, 50 years later. So here you have what you're getting at. Facts are constantly being unearthed and proven to be true, because prior to it being a fact, it's a hypothesis. It's an idea. But belief systems don't change as quickly as facts. And belief systems play into the idea of what is a truth, right? Some people believe that we should be making the world a better place by removing human suffering. The Buddha believed that. It seems like that's something that's very important to you. Other people believe that you can make the world a better place by increasing the amount of success in the world, that suffering will always be there. So you can't really, don't try to stop the suffering. Instead, try to account for more success, because the more success in the world, the more the suffering will be raised, right? There will be suffering always. There will be poor always. That's a very Christian principle, right? So you've got these different belief sets that inform the truth that people then move from. For me, the utility is less about trying to get people to align on a singular truth, and it's more about understanding each individual's perceived truth, and then using that position as your temporary frame of reference in order to have a productive conversation or productive exchange with that individual. Why argue with a Muslim? Why argue with a Buddhist? Why argue with a Christian? Why argue with a rabbi? Why argue at all if you can just adopt temporarily and understand their frame of reference and then get them to do the productive thing that you're there to get them to do? That's the utility part for me. But
do you think that's different than the way I see it?
I don't know that it's different, but I wanted to call it out specifically because if it's different, I want to learn from you where you see it similar, where you see it differently. But I also one of the places where people quickly learn to agree or disagree with me is that I take a very binary approach to relationships. I see all relationships as being transactional. It doesn't mean that you're transacting money or transacting time or transacting favors, but there has to be something of value that you're offering in exchange for something that you value from the other person. When a relationship is not transactional, there's no reason to invest in the relationship. So for me, I find that the way I maximize the transactional value of relationships is not by trying to get other people to see my point of view. It's by me adopting and adapting to their point of view first. And then if they're the kind of person that I assess as being open to a different point of view, I'll present it. But there are plenty of people who are not open to a different point of view. And if you want to have a productive transactional exchange with that kind of person, you just roll with their frame of reference.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. That, to me, it's interesting. So all of these are linguistic traps that I think eat up so much of the planet. And so many times when I hear people arguing on podcasts, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could be the arbiter, because there is an idea that I use a lot, which is I want to know if I accurately understand this person's base assumption. And what I have found in my life is when two intelligent, well-meaning people think that the other person is crazy, it is because they either have different values or different base assumptions. Values have to do with what the world ought to be, in their opinion, and base assumptions have to do with a disagreement over what is true. And I'm not a believer in post-truth world or post-fact world, but I think anybody who thinks that the truth is self-evident is a fool. And the truth is brutally difficult to get to. And for evidence of that, we still don't understand physics. Not all the way. So it's like we understand it well enough to do some amazing things, but we don't understand it all the way. And so if we can all agree to Max Planck's quote that science does not advance one insight at a time, but rather one funeral at a time, it's because people can't, to your point, adjust what they think is true. That's crazy. And you said, I think beliefs don't update as quickly as facts. It's like, yeah, okay. So people end up getting trapped by their frame of reference, which has a whole host of baggage, but also people just get lost in words. They don't take the time to define the words. And even if they do, oh my God, it is so hard to get somebody to like really understand what we mean by this. One of the most important things my wife and I ever did to make our relationship last was define a small set of key words that were like, this is what this word means now and forever for us. And so it became easier to navigate a relationship. So I think people get lost in that. Probably more effective than people getting lost in defining every term would be to say, what's your goal? I think that's incredibly important. And when people can say what their goal is in a single sentence with no parentheticals and run-ons, just like a really tight, concise 25 to 35 word sentence, it's like, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Okay, word. Yeah. So if I know that's what you're trying to achieve and you're telling me to do this thing, which sounds absolutely crazy, now this is where I come in as a writer and I say, if I were writing this person as a character, because they think they're the hero. Right. No one thinks they're the villain, ever. Right. So they think they're the hero. What would they need to believe is true in order for the hero to want to do this thing in order to accomplish that goal? And then I'm doing what you advise, which is I'm now stepping inside their frame of reference and I'm saying, oh my God, okay, cool. And so I'll just ask people, is the following base assumption how you view the world? And they either say yes, and I'm like, okay, wow, I mean, I'd agree with you, but now I understand you. And now I can actually steel man your argument. I can say, this is what you believe. And I can say, where we're colliding is this. You have this base assumption, and I have that base assumption. Or you have this goal, which is, hey, don't worry about suffering. Everyone's going to suffer. Suffering is fine. And I'm all about trying to alleviate human suffering. And so now at least we actually know where we're colliding. And man, if I could give that gift to people, again, regardless of what you're trying to accomplish. And so one thing I really want to put a fine point on that you said, because I think it's really brilliant, is not trying to persuade people, instead trying to understand them. Once you understand them, then it's like, oh, wow, okay, now I have a rough approximation of at least a caricature of, that's the wrong word because that has too much baggage. I have at least a low fidelity sense of your worldview. And so now you become a lot more predictable to me, which means I'm a lot closer to ground truth of who you are. And at least my predictive engine doesn't break anymore.
So there's two things I want to present in that accompany what your statement is right there, right? The first is that you present to people the idea like, here's what I understand your base assumption to be. There's a concept in espionage that we call priming or analytical overlay, to go back to your conversation about seeing dogs in the stars.
Same thing?
Very similar things, right? Analytical overlay is when someone's predominant understanding through life experience and education overlays how they view all new information, right? So they have a set of base assumptions. You can, in a low fidelity way, identify what those base assumptions are because they went to a private school in London, or because they grew up in Boston, or because they grew up with a military family. You can start to create an assessment of what their base assumptions might be. And then you can test those base assumptions to verify and confirm that your assessment is accurate or inaccurate, ultimately leading to a point where you understand why they see a German Shepherd in the sky versus an English Terrier in the sky. right? Because of their analytical overlay. Combine that with this idea of priming. Priming is when you present an idea, and by presenting the idea, they have no option but to have that idea essentially incept into their brain. It's like when I look at you and I say, Tom, whatever you do right now, don't think of the color orange.
No, I've already thought of the color orange, of course.
Right? And you thought of color and you thought of thoughts, right? So you've been primed in multiple areas. So now when I follow up on that question, I say, Tom, real quick, tell me what your favorite juice is. You have to fight not to say orange juice, right? Even if it's not true, you've been primed. So what jumps to mind is what you were just primed to believe, what you were just primed to say. So when it comes to this world of information, this world of fast moving, high velocity, high volume information, you can be primed and then immediately be confirmed, because they'll prime you with information, ask you a follow-up question. How do you feel about this? And now we're going to Jane on camera 2. And Jane, what does the audience think about this, right? Well, the audience just got primed to think exactly what you just told them to think. So when you put them on the spot and you force them into a high velocity situation, you're going to have a high likelihood of the primed thought being what comes right back. So when you ask somebody, am I understanding that your base assumption is this? You're doing two things. One, you're priming them of what you believe their base assumption to be. So even if you're 80% accurate, 10, 20% inaccurate, they've now been primed with what you told them you understand their base assumption to be. So their natural inclination is going to be to agree with things that maybe aren't fully accurate, but they feel on the spot to answer, and they've been primed, and it's within easy grasp for them to just regurgitate it and say it out loud. That's part of priming. If you then prime them about a base assumption that you've assumed through an analysis of their own background, you also have this idea of analytical overlay on top of that. So you run the risk of getting a confirmation that isn't fully accurate.
How do you avoid that? Like, if you really want to know what's true, you're not trying to paint somebody in a corner. However, people usually don't know what's driving their own thinking.
Correct.
And so you have to help them by saying, here's what it sounds like you're saying.
And I think you nailed a fact right there, and then a truth, which, like I said, facts and truths for me aren't the same thing. The fact is people don't know what they're thinking. Absolute fact. Even though you and I, as much time as we spend thinking, think we know what we're thinking, we still don't really know what we're thinking. That's why I'm sure that you spend time just thinking. And you jot down notes and you review your notes, and then you're like, that's not quite right. You've done it on this podcast already, where you're like, that caricature is not the right word. I have to pick that apart even more. Here in real time, even as I say it, you're able to think about thinking in real time when most people can't. So then you have to understand that most people don't know what they're thinking and don't realize they don't know what they're thinking. So for sure, they don't know what they're saying because they can't even think at the speed that they can talk. You have to build that into your assessment of people. Always going back to the idea that if you are trying to win in life, if you are trying to win in business and in entrepreneurialism, if you're trying to succeed, it's not about trying to get other people to learn. That's your truth. Your truth is, I have to help them. That's your truth. I have to help them think. I have to help them say what they're thinking. The fact is they don't know what they're thinking. How could you possibly help somebody to say what they're thinking if they don't even know what they're thinking? Instead, you're helping them to say something so that they can get off the X, because this is really uncomfortable to them to think about thinking. That was a big whirlpool of maelstrom ideas. Did it make sense to you?
It does, but I still have the follow-up question, which is, I'm not trying to plant an idea in their mind. I will say this. There are times where I am trying to plant an idea in their mind. It's what I call trapping somebody with their own value system, which is very effective. And I should do like a whole class on that, because, oh my God. However, in this case, I'm trying to refine my own toolkit and help anybody listening develop their toolkit around thinking through a novel problem well. And for that, I need to be able to actually really just understand the situation. I'm not trying to plant anything in anybody's mind. I'm really just trying to figure out, where are you at? But people will talk in circles. They will be in run-on sentences. I get into this all the time, where I will finally just have to say to people, hey, Like that is the world's longest sentence. I asked you for a single sentence on this. You've been talking for 3 minutes. So then I'll start saying what I think I hear you saying is this. Is that accurate? And so we have a thing here at Impact Theory where I'll say, I want to get to the point where you say the exact words, you understand my position perfectly. And you'll usually get to like, yeah, you've got the essence. No. So I'm missing something. What part am I missing? So anyway, how do you, without planting something in somebody's mind or priming them, how do you unearth what they're thinking?
The utility of information for me is to never disclose the full extent of the information I understand. It's something we call in espionage terms, we call it information superiority.
Even in your marriage?
So my marriage is a different animal, because in my marriage, my wife and I, we try to operate at a level of transparency, mainly because we've both been trained to see non-transparency.
All right, so give me both angles. So one where first give me the I'm trying to conceal.
Okay.
But then I'll want to go through when you're in transparency mode with your wife or anybody else, what does that look like?
So when I'm trying to conceal, I'm in receive mode. And I validate, I authenticate, I confirm, right?
So
this is what you believe.
Internally, you're like, okay, I think he believes this. How do you verify it?
I ask a follow-up related question. Let's say something that's 10% different to see if I get the answer I expect to get. And then I'll push myself another 10% and another 10% until I find the boundary and I'm getting it wrong, right? So when somebody says something like, I think it's so crazy that Dunkin' Donuts puts, makes donut sandwiches, right? I also think it's crazy that Dunkin' Donuts makes donut sandwiches. But are they saying it's crazy cool? Or are they saying it's crazy sick and gross? So I've got to ask a question that's 10% off, right? Like, oh, do you think that it's just too sweet? Or do you think that do you think that the sweetness goes well with the savory? And then eventually you'll get to the place where they're just like, oh, it's just so gross. Why would you put meat between two donuts? Now I know where you're at. Rather than coming out and saying, are you saying that you think it's gross, or are you saying that you think it's cool? Because as soon as I ask that direct question, they now know that I don't know what they're thinking. Up until that, they assumed that what they communicated was crystal clear. I don't want to give them the advantage of knowing what I do and don't understand. Instead, I can create a whole conversation, which means I can create a whole relationship, a whole series of transactions. I can build what we call social capital or social currency by engaging in a conversation about something as low stakes as donut sandwiches. And that's what's really valuable. If you think about somebody who's trying to build a relationship, someone who's trying to develop a business relationship for a client, someone who's trying to build a promotional argument with their boss, the thing that you need the most is to just have some sort of capital transactional exchange with the person in control of that fate, the client, the customer, the romantic partner, the boss. The way that you build that is through a series of transactions where they feel validated, authenticated, and heard. If you can make them feel like you understand them, they just have to feel it. It doesn't have to be true. And we know that the brain accepts emotional decisions before factual decisions. So if you can make someone feel like you agree with them, even if you don't, you're actually giving them more value than they're giving you. You have control of that relationship. So in my approach to business, and my approach to relationships, in my business, in my approach to most elements of life, I'm trying to understand where the other person is coming from without disclosing where I stand on that topic, until I get to a place where I have enough information that validates that where I stand is close to where they stand. And then I will disclose that, and in an effort to bring that relationship even closer together, right? That's how I handle it in general.
All right. What about when you're in full transparency mode?
In full transparency mode with my wife, what I'll do is I'll over-explain, right? I will tell her, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling, here's where I'm coming from. And not only will I tell her what I understand about my position, I will also tell her about what I don't understand about my position, right? So as an example, I do a TV show. I'm on a TV show with History Channel. It's my second season. I've been traveling for about 5 months now. I've got one more month of travel. I travel somewhere between 25 and 35 days at a time.
Oh my God.
And then I'm home for 5 days or 10 days, right? So I'm missing out on these core months of my children, my 10-year-old son, my 6-year-old daughter. And at the beginning of the season, they had a high tolerance for me being gone. They're accustomed to me traveling, they're even accustomed to me traveling for months at a time, but they're not accustomed to me traveling for 6 months, months at a time. It's half a year. So for Christmas, I was home with my wife, and I'm walking her through my feelings about missing these elements of my children's lives. And I'm telling her, like, here's what I know I feel. I know I feel guilty. I know I feel sad. I know I miss them. I know that I'm doing it to help build the business and to help build the brand and to help, we live in a world where the best currency is eyeballs and awareness. And I know I'm building all that. And I know I'm building that for them, but it still hurts. And I don't know what to do with the hurts. And I feel like I'm letting you down. And I don't even know why I feel like I'm letting you down, because I'm bringing you a good paycheck and I'm giving you a good life. And I talk to you as often as I can, but I know you're still suffering because you have anxiety and because you have, you didn't sign up to be a mom without a dad there to help you. And no matter how many nannies and cooks and cleaners I hire, it's not the same thing as having a husband. And I just kind of put it in full transparency mode. I front end load what I know and what I don't know. And then I let her respond. And in that response, what I often find is that some of the things I don't know become known, because a lot of what I don't know is tied to how she perceives something. But also, when you have somebody that you're so close to that you can give that level of transparency, their inputs connect dots that you couldn't connect previously, or they highlight places where you connected dots incorrectly. And you can push back on that, and you can confirm that, and you can find great comfort and relief when you have those few people that you can open that level of transparency to.
Yeah, I want that for everyone. When you have somebody like that you can trust, that is your equal, that helps you think through things, that can see things in yourself that you can't see, going back to trying to more accurately connect the dots, even just from a utilitarian standpoint, it's amazingly helpful. But even just from oh my God, it feels nice to be seen and to share a life and all that stuff. It really is incredible. But yeah, I find most people struggle there. One, they probably don't know their own edges of what they understand and what they don't understand. They don't know how to process out loud and begin to map out their own thinking. Yeah, it's this goes back to one of the first things I said, which is people are way too easy to confuse. It's just people have a really hard time with nuanced positions. And then even if they can sort of touch it for a second, it then goes away, and they need a caricature, accurately used this time, to hold on to. And that's the fun thing about an impression or an actual caricature drawing is with, very little detail, I can convince you that is who you think it is. Like if I'm doing a caricature of you, if I get the hair right, like,
it's 90% there.
Yeah, people are gonna be like, oh yeah, it's Andrew Bustamante. Got it. So it's really interesting how you can, with very little information, however, it's not super accurate. And so, yeah, if people can't get to the nuanced part of it, they're in real trouble.
So here's where I would love your input for sure. So I was just telling you that Everyday Spy crossed the $1 million mark.
Yes.
And I'm very excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Amazing, man.
I'm very excited to run.
Top 9% of all businesses.
It's an incredible feeling.
It's amazing.
And it's incredible to know that we're really just starting.
Facts.
And it's so I'm beyond the moon in terms of excitement. But at the same time, a part of how we got there is not by trying to create truths for people. It's not like we were trying to push against the predominant way of thinking. Instead, what we were doing was presenting what we believed to be facts. Here's factual systems. Here's factual processes. Here's factual information that we have seen work for us, that I've seen work for me, that may work for you, or may work for your business, or may work for your relationship, or may work for your health and your fitness, right? But we always presented it, we always targeted and marketed to people where they were, according to their own existing current beliefs, their own existing current truths, their own existing current analytical overlay. We primed them with thoughts in our marketing campaigns. We essentially reached out, to use a spy concept. We reached out to them where they were. We didn't try to reach out to them aspirationally to where they were going. We tried to reach out to them where they were. And the reason I say that is because, as you seek to share truth, I admire that. I value that. I honor that. I don't intend to build a business that's trying to share truth. as much as I have found the success of listening and adapting to where people are, and then entrepreneurially marketing to them where they are and building that connection with them where they are, so that you can essentially get into their head, into their mind, into their heart, and gain that transactional exchange that turns into a relationship that becomes a long-term customer, because the customer will do what you ask them to do to get the outcomes that are predictable only if they do the work that you've asked them to do. Is there a flaw in that? Is there a layer of evolution that you can add to that? I am now asking completely selfishly.
Well, it's interesting. So I don't know that there is a layer to that isn't individual. So when I look at companies that are perfectly happy to sell people what they want rather than what they need, I get very jealous because I can't do it. And there's something about my wiring where I'm only interested in selling you what I know you actually need, because otherwise I feel like a fake. And I fucking hate that. And so I understand about myself, and this is why I tell people, and this is self-revelatory, maybe more than it is universally accurate, but it is so true of me, I cannot say anything else. And that is, all that matters in life is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. Again, that's a confession. So all I care about is how I feel about myself. I won't say I don't care about what other people think, but if I feel like I've really honored my values and I've showed up and I fought for the things that I believe are right, if the world were to at some point misunderstand me and try to malign me or whatever, that wouldn't damage me. I would be very sad because it will disrupt my ability to build my business. But I would think of it like that, like, oh, this is really messing up my ability to build a business because people have the wrong idea about who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I believe in what I'm trying to do and trying to accomplish. Or if the world suddenly was like, helping to eliminate human suffering and increasing human flourishing, that's ass, bro. And like, why are you pursuing that? Then I'd be like, all right, you guys are out of your fucking minds.
Yeah.
So I have such an internal anchor on that, as that just being objectively what I'll say is true. I know we use that word very differently, but that to me is the intersection of ought and is. Ought being a value judgment and is being, I actually think that's how the world works. That if you empower people to navigate novel problems well, they will, based on the evolutionary algorithms that run in all of our minds, they will have a neurological state that I'll call fulfillment that is the thing people should be aiming for. It's the only pleasant feeling that can survive grief, as an example. So if you're in grief, like that's going to suck no matter what. But a bowl of ice cream does not give you happiness in the middle of grief in the way that fulfillment still gives you an anchor of, I'm proud of who I am, even though right now, the loss of my wife or my mother or whatever is just, it's grueling. So that is an ought to me. And that's what I'm aiming for. I'm trying to help as many people exist in that neurological state as often as possible. Now, where that gets complicated is where, because of frame of reference, the thing that makes you feel good about yourself is something that creates like atrocity. And hey, welcome back to the Israel-Hamas conversation. So that is really fascinating, but I don't think there's a way to escape that, because such is the nature of the algorithms running in the human mind, which is why these problems have no sort of absolute solution. But I think that there are ways to think through these problems well. So we'll get to that in a second, but to just officially answer your question, you will thrive. So if you can do that from a business perspective and sell people what they want, you will do very well, because people will pay for what they want all day long. What I fear is that at some point, the money won't solve the problem. You will start looking to, but are we actually helping people? If you're at all wired the way that I am, that question is going to occur to you aggressively. But I look at people, I'll let them remain nameless, but I look at some of the big names, and this will often happen with sales guys, and they make a ton of money. But I cringe. I could not do it. No matter how much money you told me I could make, the way that would make me feel about myself, I couldn't do it. And that holds me back. But since I believe the only thing that really matters is how I feel about myself, that's been my life, that all the money in the world, if I don't like who I am, that's a one-way path to suicide. So I don't want to be rich and killing myself. That just doesn't strike me as interesting in the slightest. And yet people take that life path. So anyway, that for me would be the only thing. And I don't know if you're wired like I'm wired. So maybe that's just like, no, I'll be fine. I don't know.
No, what's funny is one of the things, and I find that entrepreneurialism has been the best teacher possibly ever, because the market teaches you lessons.
Oh yes, my friend.
Customers teach you lessons. Experimentation teaches you lessons. And one of the big lessons that I feel like I've learned is the truth behind the 80-20 rule. Right? And how powerful that 80-20 rule really is. And when I think of it specifically, what I've seen it play out in my audience base is that when I try really hard to market what people need, I have of 100% of buyers, 80% won't complete it.
Correct.
20% will.
Well, 80% probably more won't even buy it.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's the first level, right? 80% won't buy it, 20% will. Of the 20% that does buy it, 80% won't finish it, right. 20% will.
Now there I have solutions for you.
And then, but second to that, at the same time, when I A/B test that against an 80-20 rule, what they want, the same mathematical principle reigns out. Of the 100% of people that buy it, 80% don't complete it, 20% do. So I bring it up not as a lesson for me, as much as something that I have found to be absolutely critical to reaching the point where I am in my business, is understanding the mathematical principles, the data-driven facts that exist behind sales and marketing, that whether you market to what they want or whether you market to what they need, there may be different conversions at first, but then when it comes to the actual adopters, human behavior reigns out. 80% don't complete it, 20% will. So you have to have a plan for recapturing the 80% that don't complete it, because if they don't complete it, they don't get the outcome. If they don't get the outcome, you're not changing any lives. So, I mean, the mission of our company is to use SPY education to break barriers. So just like you, I am very much in the business of breaking barriers. If we're not breaking barriers, we're not doing business. Sales is sales, right? Money is just a way of counting the number of lives that we're touching, because it's very hard to get people to raise their hand and say, you changed my life, you changed my life. It's much easier to be like, we changed $1 million worth in lives this year. We're going to try to change $3 million in lives next year. It's something you can actually measure. But what's fascinating to me is that the moral quandary of how you market, what you sell is oftentimes less relevant than how you drive people towards the outcome that you're trying to get them to achieve. Because once they taste outcome, they become lifetime customers. But you got to get them to outcome first.
Yeah, you have to get them to outcome, and very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, getting people to outcome quickly is the name of the game. That when I said, oh, I have a solution for you there, that's exactly the solution. Is you have to figure out how to class something, how to get them to feel something as a win very quickly. You probably have 60 minutes. If you don't get somebody to feel something directionally, obviously you're not going to get them to the final outcome. But if you can get them directionally to feel like, oh, wow, I had a little victory in the right way, pointed in the right direction. If you can't get that to them quickly, then they just won't stick with it, much to my dismay, but such is human nature. Now we could really derail on that, but I want to come back to Israel and Hamas. So this is going to be a really good case test for, I think we did a pretty good job of laying out how to think through very difficult problems. And this is maybe the intractable problem of our times. And so I seriously doubt that you and I will come to a 3-step plan that they can implement. And look, we saw world peace, everybody, and get the Nobel Peace Prize for this podcast, though that will be the aim.
Let's try it. Yes.
Right. So, but I do want to deploy this now as we go through this. So this is not a topic that I'm deeply familiar with, but I really believe it's important for people to show their work. What I mean by that is, on this podcast, what I'm constantly doing is showing people how I think through problems. And all the success that I've had is this thing that I do live on the podcast. This is how I encounter a difficult problem in my marriage. This is how I encounter a difficult problem in business. And I go through this thing. And so it is what we laid out earlier. All right. So we know that step 1 is mapping the terrain. So walk me through, what is going on?
So when you take a look at the battlefield here, not the literal battlefield, but the landscape of Israel and Palestine, what you have is something that in many ways goes all the way back to biblical days. Abraham, who's the father of all nations, had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael became the father of Islam. Isaac became the father of Judaism and on to become the father of Christianity. So the conflict that exists between Palestine, a Muslim country, or a Muslim group, and Israel, a Jewish, largely predominantly Jewish group, essentially is the generational ongoing conflict between Isaac and Ishmael.
And is there, so forgive me, dear listeners, but I think of this as a story and a very powerful story, but one designed to convey things at each branch. So between the brothers, I have to imagine there was a tale that we learn about each brother. Each brother represents something. What do the brothers represent?
So I am not creative enough, I think, to speak to the literary element of
Jordan
it.
Peterson. No, for real. Like, this is his whole shtick.
Yeah.
Like, showing how basically modern humanity can be read through the lens of religious
Ancient
traditions
story.
and what those stories tell you. Most people haven't read his book, Maps of Meaning. It is unbelievably good. Anyway, so that part we don't have. We have a dot point that has a gap. Maybe we won't be able to fill it in here, but I get your point. So we've got the two brothers.
Yep.
They create two different traditions.
And they both have valid claim all the way back to the biblical.
A valid claim of what?
A valid claim all the way back to biblical and or Quranic tradition to being tied to the father of all nations.
Okay. What does that matter?
Because for both of them, what they're really trying to say is that they have a right to survive in equality, that they are tied to the father of all nations.
But does this come down to, hey, we're tied to the father of all nations, and that manifests as dirt? And so this dirt and rock is rightfully mine.
I think that's the oversimplified way that the Western world has.
Is it oversimplified, or is that really what, like, at some point this manifests as something either ideological or tangible?
So the place where it becomes tangible and ideological is in the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the Jewish diaspora that had been hunted and killed by the Nazi Party needed a country of their own. And because other countries in the world didn't want to take on the refugees, they essentially took them all to the Palestinian state that is now known as Israel. And the Western allies granted the boundaries of Israel and said, this is where the Jews should live. This is where Jerusalem exists. This is where this is their homeland, where they were born, where they came from.
Going back to the brothers.
But the Palestinian Muslims were already there. They had never been displaced from their homeland. So by having the West create a nation state, create boundaries and everything for a group of religious people, Jews that were persecuted during World War II, now all of a sudden the West defined the organizational national structure of Israel. And that's where the conflict really started, because now you had Western allies saying, this is the Jewish state defining itself as Israel, the Palestinian diaspora, who were now being forced from their own homeland, saying, but we were already here. Like, this is Jerusalem is the city where Muhammad ascended into heaven. Like, this is a holy place for us too. And so the West was just like, well, then you can both share it. We're going home, right? We got a party after VE Day. We're done here. And that's where everything started. From there, you also then had Western powers funding and fueling the economic success of Israel.
And by the way, I just want people listening at home, you are providing a very fast painting. I know enough to know that there's, God only knows how much history of conflict before 1948, where these boundaries are laid and all that stuff. I just want people to understand this is an exercise in how to think through a difficult problem.
Right.
This is not a one-for-one accurate representation of everything. You will need a far longer video from experts in this field. We go into this conversation fully understanding that. But I do think to the initial framing of this episode, I think it's very important to understand what I'm trying to do. I think putting your head down is the wrong move at this particular moment in history. there are probably times that come and go throughout history where it is okay to put your head down. And for the first 40 years of my life, I had my head down and it worked out wonderfully. But this moment feels different. Now, that could be a mirage. Maybe it's just my age and everybody sort of pokes their head up at this point in their age and starts thinking the way that I'm thinking. I don't know. But this moment really does feel different to me. And we'll get into AI and some other things later. I think there are a lot of threats on the board right now. Certainly AI, technology, social media, all of that. We talked about velocity and volume of information earlier. All of that's at play. So anyway, I just want to set that stage so the comments doesn't waste time with like the boring shit, like, because yes, simplistic viewpoint here from the setting of the table, we'll talk, okay, but what do you do now?
Right.
And what I really hope, because I think that the comments are going to end up being a big part of what makes this episode useful to a larger audience. So I hope that we can eliminate some of the more, I don't want people to get bogged down in the wrong thing. So yes, many details to talk about. We just need to set a quick table so that then we can talk about things like, hey, when humans have a historical conflict over who has a right to the land without getting lost in the minutia of that, how do you move forward? And that just, again, so we're setting the table. Sorry.
No, so it's fair. So I'll set the table faster too.
No. I don't need you to set it faster because I know no matter how much you do, we're not going to get there. The more detail you have, give it to me for sure.
Fair enough. So then what ended up happening was now we have, as the West places the Jewish diaspora into Israel and supports the establishment of a Jewish state, we then also have the responsibility of the West in fueling the economy for the Jewish state. Because you can't, we did the same thing in Japan. We're going to rebuild. There's economic benefits to the United States in rebuilding foreign countries. There's economic benefits in having allies that you help economically rebuild. So fast forward till today, and now you have Israel had this massive boost economically from Western partners and Western allies when they were placed in Israel. The Palestinian counterparts did not have access to that financial benefit that the Israelis did. So there's, like you said, decades of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and everything's documented out there, and there's 1,000 ways that you can look at it and interpret it and whatever else. But in the end, what happened was the Palestinians, through the lens of most Muslim countries, became oppressed, became ostracized from their own land, their own nation, where they could thrive and to build an economy and build a political establishment and build a legacy for their future. Because that land was being supported and developed by the Jewish state, and the Jewish state and the Muslim state just didn't want to get along for a number of reasons that we don't really have a say in because we didn't live there at the time, right? And that's how I interpret the many years of historical conflict between Palestinians and Israelis in that country. The place where we have to fast forward this to is till 1997. In 1987, Hamas became a political group that was supporting Palestinians in their fight to resist what was perceived to be Israeli oppression. Hamas became the more aggressive group versus the Palestinian Authority, which became what's known as a secular group or a non-religious group. And those became the two political powers vying for support from the Palestinian people. And at the time in 1987, the vast majority of that support went to the Palestinian Authority, not to Hamas. Hamas's promise at the time was, we will destroy the Israeli country and we will return the entire country back to the Muslim people. Not a religious war. They weren't going after killing Jews. They were trying to destroy Israel. Not that it makes it that much better, but at least to clarify what their ambitions were in 1987. Nobody determined that Hamas was a terrorist organization in 1987, despite their claim, despite their promise to eradicate Israel. In 1997, following major terrorist attacks inside the United States, the peak being the Timothy McVeigh bombing of Oklahoma City, the United States became very focused on terrorism and counterterrorism. And in 1987, they created the Terrorist Watch List, or the Foreign Terrorist Organization List. And in that list, they listed every Muslim extremist group as a terrorist organization. On that list, Hamas was included. So at that moment in time in 1997, based on what was happening in the United States in their struggle with extremism, they targeted Muslim extremism as one of the many extremisms that they would list as terrorist organizations. That's why even today, the United States lists Hamas as a terrorist group, where most of the rest of the world does not. There's only 12 countries total that list Hamas as a terrorist organization. And in many ways, it's because those 12 countries, there's 11 countries, take the lead, they follow the lead of the United States. The UN as an organization does not list Hamas as terrorist. So in 1997, Hamas becomes a terrorist group, but they're this terrorist group that also has a political arm that's supporting and taking care of the Palestinian people within Gaza. That's already kind of a mess. That becomes complicated, right? Palestine can't create a standing army. They can't create their own standing economy. They can't create foreign trade. They can't create anything significant because they're not recognized as a nation. So a few Muslim countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Egypt recognize the Palestinian people, but not the Palestinian state. And everybody recognizes the right of the Palestinians to a state, but nobody wants to say what that state is going to be. So that becomes a mess that most of the first world doesn't even follow, doesn't really care about until things start blowing up in Israel and Palestine. October 7th, 2023, this group known as Hamas, based out of Gaza, conducts this massive incursion. The most doctrinally correct word is it was an incursion across a border within one country, closest to a civil war, much closer to a civil war than an attack from a foreign nation, right? They carry out this incursion that uses terrorist tactics, terrorist tools, but also targets military targets for a political goal that has been stated and consistent since 1987. Now we live in this world where what is this thing that's happening? The United States labels the group as a terrorist group. However, all humanitarian aid that we send to Palestine has to go through Hamas. Like, they control the politics, they control the governance, they control the hospitals. Not terror. Al-Qaeda never controlled hospitals, right? It's not as clear as we think it is, but it's hard to get that nuance across with the velocity and volume of information. So now we live in this world where velocity and volume of information make it so that we all see the dead bodies and the crying children and the dying women on the Palestinian side, but we also read about the atrocities that were executed against these Israelis in a surprise attack on October 7th. We're faced with all the information, and there's no clarity as to what's really the nuance, what's really the battlefield, what are we really looking at here? So you've got Israel trying to counter what they know is a threat to their national sovereignty, but they've also got a problem with a group that was created because of the oppression they put on the Palestinian people. And that is what the group states is their whole core purpose. The reason they exist at all is because of that oppression. So you've got this absolute mess that the world is watching play out day to day, but at the same time, the world isn't invested enough to actually try to resolve the conflict.
How often are you checking your credit score, afraid of identity theft or account breaches? We all use the internet every single day for important things like personal banking and remote work, so why not protect yourself with our sponsor, Aura? Aura is an all-in-one cybersecurity service that keeps you safe online. Aura identifies data brokers exposing your info and submits opt-out requests on your behalf. Aura also monitors your credit, tracks your passwords for data breaches, and secures your online activity with VPN and anti-malware protection. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code. Okay, so one, I want to acknowledge that is a sketch from a perspective. Again, speaking to the comment section right now, of course, there are going to be different perspectives on that. I don't know this well enough to feel like I have a perspective, but I will lay out a few things that I am aware of as a way of filling in additional color to your point about trying to triangulate based on opposing viewpoints. And I think yours is from the different voices that I've heard, yours is relatively sedate. There are people that are far sort of harder on the Palestinian side, though I'd say you lean pro-Palestinian. I don't know if that feels right to you, but that seems reasonable. You're pretty middle of the road, but if you have a lean, it's that way. So some of the other chips that I've heard by way of putting dots that people will have to connect as they try to build a narrative that creates the emotion that allows them to have a way of thinking how to move forward would be, okay, you mentioned the Jews are coming out of the Holocaust. So you've just had 6 million people in the diaspora, literally at an industrial level, killed in unimaginably horrific ways. And I can only imagine. You started this by saying like they're able to trace all of this back to the brothers and the split and the way that sort of goes. And you mentioned compasses earlier. And if you get off by 3 degrees in the beginning, doesn't seem like much, but 1,000 years later, there's a huge gulf between you, which is very much what this feels like. I bring that up to say that you really can go back and back and back on who owns the land. You can go back and back and back on who did who wrong. And so trying to find like where it all started is probably not super fruitful. But if you're the Israelis or if you're a Jew post World War II, never again, we're going to be strong this time. We're going to build a nation state. That nation state has to be somewhere. We go back to the region of Judea, which is where they derive their name from. So to your point, they were removed from their homeland, but still very much spiritually, that probably isn't the right word, but there's a thing there where they still have a massive identity in that region that they're tied to even all these years later. Also, it's my understanding that there was no official Palestinian state. So it's not like the Jews went in and took over a state. So the West, I'm now guessing, I want to be very clear about sort of where I'm teleporting myself into the mind of somebody and when I'm offering what I think are facts. Now I am very much speaking like a writer would speak. But if I'm the West and I'm like, there's no state here anyway, I don't really fully understand the conflict. I can see bad things coming because I'm smart and I understand humans well enough. There's probably going to be some drama here, which is why the US actually pulls their support at one point of this whole idea. But nonetheless, it's like, we'll do it. We'll bone out. To your point, we want to go celebrate. We've just won World War II. And I don't see a better solution. So let's see what happens. Through all of that, there are times where a 2-state solution has been proposed. The Palestinians reject it. There's the whole notion of from the river to the sea. They don't believe that there's any amount of Israel that can exist. I'm using the word Israel very intentionally as opposed to Jews. This is where I don't know it well enough to know if that accurately captures the spirit. It certainly accurately captures the PR. That is very much how it is presented. No, this isn't about religious difference. This is not a racist thing. This is just purely Israel has occupied our land that is rightfully ours, and we want to get rid of the nation state of Israel. Now, of course, functionally, the way that you do that is by killing people, ripping them, tearing them from their land, because they will, of course, fight back. If they were all just willing to up and leave, then sure, but we know that that's not going to happen. So multiple times that's offered and rejected for the reasons that I just laid out. And you end up in a position now where you gave me a piece that I had not heard before, so it's very interesting, because I looked at this and was like, okay, Israel ends up thriving economically and Palestine has not. Now, of course, I'm aware of the positioning of it's an open air prison. How could they ever hope to? You have these people that have just subjugated them. And of course, the economy is never going to grow. What I had never heard before, and it's very interesting, is, well, the West really helped them when they were in that nascent, fragile place. The West helped them get their feet under them. I think it begs the question, what have they been doing with the aid that they've gotten? Because it's billions of dollars. And so one would hope that they would be spending that on infrastructure. So anyway, this is where I now start going, okay, I don't know how many more pieces it makes sense to put on the table, because I have a base assumption that now we're just getting into who's right and who's wrong. I have a base assumption that this will continue to be an intractable problem if you are approaching this from right and wrong, which is why, again, as a headline reader, the Abraham Accords strike me as very positive, because it was just human greed, to use a terrible word for something that maybe isn't bad at all, which is when people are thriving economically, the people feel good. You feel like you have a future. You have hope that your kids' lives will be better than yours. And when you get people in that kind of momentum, now they're pointed in a positive direction. So again, I'm leaking my base assumptions here. So my base assumption is you have to give the Palestinian people a sense of a future, that their kids' lives will be better than theirs, that you want to fill them with hope and optimism and all of that. Now, you're not going to do that with the who's right and who's wrong. Now, I happen to have a weird sort of thing in my life that makes me maybe look at things a little bit differently. Again, frame of reference, this is bias now. But my wife's family is from Cyprus. And for people that don't know the history of Cyprus, it is freakishly similar to the Israel-Palestine conflict. You had Greeks and Turks living on the same little island. If you've never looked it up, like this is not a big place, living on the same island. And one day in the 70s, I think, late 60s, early 70s, the Turks invade and they cut the island in half. And the people on the north side of the island, my wife's family included, they're just stripped of everything. This house isn't yours. It was yours Monday morning when you woke up. Monday night, it's not your house. We've seen these videos play out in Israel, Palestine. So we know this drama. And I mean, gut-wrenching, as you can imagine. You literally lose everything in an instant, man. Like I can't imagine. Like if tonight this house and everything that I own ceased to be mine, that would be obviously the most traumatic thing that ever happened to me in my life. So brutal. The crazy thing is that you don't have the same ongoing bloodshed between the Greeks and the Turks. And so it makes me ask, what is different? Because you have the same sense of the Greeks, like that's not their land to take. They have no right to that land. That was our land. We were kicked out of it. It's rightfully ours. You can trace it back. So much, history of Greeks occupying the island, raising it, from nothingness, taming it, all that. The Greeks have a very long history. And so, and I'm sure the Turks would say the same thing, right? So even though you have all of that, you have not got the same, they've managed to reach stability. So the question becomes, what is different? And this is where it seems to me that you have to at least begin exploring the ideologies and what's happening. And again, you're never going to get either side to give up their religion. So for me, as I think through this difficult problem, I'm just saying whatever solution you're going to propose has to take that off the table. You cannot ask them to go, oh, the other person's right. Their religion is correct. They're not going to do that. You can't ask them to go, you're right. We're just going to move out of Israel and hand it over. They're never going to do that. And given that in 2005, the Jews pulled out of the West Bank and out of the Gaza Strip, and it didn't solve the conflict. So even if another was like, hey, but if you just leave this area, then everything really will be fine. They don't have a reason to believe. Like historically, just the way the humans are, they're going to be like, no, we tried that and it didn't work. So you got to take that off the table. So now when I think about, okay, as I tell entrepreneurs all the time, if you have a difficult problem to solve, ask yourself, has anybody solved this problem in the past? And if you want to look at it from apartheid, cool. Look at South Africa. What did they get right? Or look at some of the countries where a new nation state was born. And is that the right way to handle this? And then you can start at least mapping out why those would or wouldn't work. And from what I hear, because the first time I heard of a two-state solution, I was like, that makes sense to me. Do it yeah, perfect. I can't believe I didn't think of that, right? and then everyone's like, yeah, no, nobody considers that realistic anymore. But that feels like the thing we have to find out. That is a gap that we'll never be able to resolve this until we find out why having a two-state solution won't work. Do you think I'm crazy about that? Or because that to me feels like you have to put your finger on that and say, why doesn't the two-state solution exist? The first argument, I think, is going to be Israel has no right to exist. They occupied this territory. And then I'm like, I get it. Cyprus, again, horrible. Fucking, if you want to get the people that I know and love in tears, all you need to do is talk about that day. So I have seen a similar heartache up close. but that's going to be militaristic, right? That's guns, death, bloodshed. And is that really a game you want to play when Israel's a way more accomplished military? Probably not. Do you want it spreading wider in the region? Speaking as a guy in America, so discount my opinion because I'm not in it. That sounds horrible to me. And again, let me leak my bias. I'm making the base assumption that we should be trying to avoid death. If that isn't on somebody's bingo card, that's where we'll disconnect. We'll be two ships passing the night. Anyway, so I put my finger on that. That feels like the thing that has to be addressed. And if the punchline is from the river to the sea, all that's left is military. So yeah, where does any of that thinking go wrong? In terms of just finding the thing that we have to say, we have to understand this thing.
I don't know that I would label any of that thinking as wrong. There's a couple of places where I think it's worth clarifying. So like I mentioned earlier, I tend to look at everything through a lens of practicality, right? Value, fact, vast versus truth, right? And you made a base assumption about me earlier. You tried to verify it, that I'm pro-Palestine. I pull heavy from my espionage background. And one of the key things that was taught to me by the director of CIA, by General Petraeus, was you don't disclose your position. Because as soon as you disclose your position, you've disclosed your position. I was mentioning that to you earlier about information superiority, right? I've never disclosed my position.
I should have asked you 10% questions.
I will disclose my position for you.
Oh, word.
Right? So impact theory exclusive for anybody who cares. I am actually pro-Israel. But the reason I'm pro-Israel is not what I think people will understand. I am pro-Israel because I am very matter-of-factly pro-America. I am pro-United States. The country that I think should remain the dominant superpower in the world is the United States. To aid the United States in that objective, we must ensure the survival of Israel and the Israeli state. Practically speaking, not ideologically, not based on history and justice and everything else, what's happening to the Palestinian people is an atrocity. It's a terrible, sad thing that has forced them into a path of revolutionary terrorism, very similar to what we saw when the United States was rejecting the civil rights movement, when women weren't allowed to vote and they turned to violence. Like, we've seen this before. And it is a sad, tragic thing. What's happened to Palestine, what has happened to Palestine, what is yet to happen to Palestine. All of that being acknowledged, as an American who wants to see American primacy in the future, we have to stand up and support the Israeli state. Having a strategic, economic, and military partner like Israel sit next to our strategic and military partner that is Jordan in the Middle East gives us an incredible economic and military advantage over the entire globe that we cannot sacrifice. Ideology aside, if we want to protect American lives, we have to ensure the long-term longevity, support, and close relationships with the Israeli people and with the country of Israel. That is my official position. What I find is so sad is that there are so few pro-Israel voices that are giving any kind of validation to the Palestinian plight. So I want to be one of those voices that can say, we must partner and support Israel. And the way that we partner and support them is by finding a way for them to protect and defend themselves without turning to this kind of destruction. Because as long as they turn down this path of destruction, they're isolating themselves from everyone else in the world. And that makes it so that we have a very hard time standing next to them as the beacon of freedom in the world. We have a hard time supporting Israel in the face of everybody else, including all the countries of the United Nations and NATO, who look at us and say, how can you stand by and let this happen? How can you support this? How can you fund this? How can you encourage this? Not to mention the corruption challenges that Israel has that so closely align with the corruption challenges of our own past presidential, hopefuls and presidents that we're trying to work through ourselves, between Netanyahu's corruption and Trump's corruption, right? It's a mess, and it's a sad mess. But the bottom line practical element here is that Israel encourages and expands national security objectives for the United States. That doesn't mean we should call Hamas terrorists just because we don't want to call them revolutionary terrorists, which is really more akin to what Malcolm X was, revolutionary terrorism, right? We don't want to go down that road because it's too nuanced for the American people. Instead, we're going to put big billboards up in major cities that say, Hamas is not just Israel's problem, right? Hamas is your problem too. So I say all that because my conclusion is the same as your conclusion. The world, the globe, needs to broker a two-state solution. And in order to incentivize that two-state solution, we need to rally and give the Palestinians that economic boost that the Israelis got post-World War II. Let's find a way to massively expedite their infrastructure, their technology, their ability to self-govern. Let's give them everything they need. If that means that they want to have close ties with the Arab world, that's exactly what the Arab world has wanted forever. That's why Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE rushed to the aid of the Palestinians. So let's make that happen. And when we negotiate land, let's find a way to make sure that they're neighboring a Arab ally like Jordan or Egypt. Let's find a way to make that happen. Let's make it a world problem instead of saying it's their problem. Because every pair of brothers who has ever had an argument over business, they've needed an arbitrator to help them. They've needed the help of others to come to a meaningful way of resolving their conflict. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I am saying like a strong Israel is in America's best interest. A strong, peaceful Middle East is in America's best interest. A strong Muslim world that counterbalances Iran is in America's best interest. So we need to find a way to let people know that this is a more complex issue than what they're hearing, and we're not afraid of the complexity. Let's lean into the complexity and let's solve it together. Because the more that America can influence peace around the world, the more that America is an influential power in the world. And when we don't step into our influence, we leave a vacuum that allows our largest adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, to step into that vacuum instead. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the global world right now. We're seeing not only are those countries stepping into the vacuum that we're leaving behind, but they're allying together. So much so that even Hollywood movies like Leave the World Behind is literally showing what would happen if North Korea and Iran worked together to cut off the United States. That's why there were elements of both languages in the movie itself, right? Spoiler alert. But my point is, if even modern media, if even Hollywood is showing this division from east to west, that goes to show how much it's real, because art reflects reality.
Okay, so one thing I think we have to acknowledge, if we're going to at least put all the pieces on the table, and I just want to reiterate, I don't have the hubris to think I'm the man to turn to solve this problem. Trust me.
I would turn to you. I thought that was a really good solution, man. That was a good solution.
I don't think we have a real one yet because of something you taught me, which is that you really have to get in the mind of your enemy. And every assumption I have, I know is coming from my own frame of reference, which could not be more Western, could not be more American. And they don't want the same things I want. So I'll ask arguably the hardest question of all: how much does the cultural mindset of the Palestinians or the Israelis, is this a cultural collision from just the way that they view how things ought to be, that you're just never going to be able to deal with that? Or is this, well, Iran is throwing so much money around, they're just doing their bidding? Like, what is the point of, like, if I'm Iran and I want to destabilize Israel and get the world to turn on them, what's the lever that I pull to get the Palestinian people to do what I want them to do? Is it a religious lever that I pull? Is it something else?
So in the radicalization process, one of the things that we're taught at CIA is that there's a ladder of radicalization, an actual process for how you radicalize an extremist. And that's an extremist, whether they're a Christian extremist or an ethnic extremist or a Muslim extremist. There's a ladder of extremism. And the first step is validating an injustice. It's the first step, because when people believe that there's a perceived injustice and nobody validates that injustice, then they are conditioned, they are primed to believe that there was no injustice and they're just angry about nothing. So the first step in a radicalization process is to validate an injustice. It's independent of religion, right? This was done to you. It should have never been done to you. And then the next step in the radicalization ladder is to create the aggressor who's guilty of the injustice. This should have never happened to you. It happened to you because of this villain. It's a story. Mm. And now your injustice has been validated, and there is a group that executed that injustice on you. The next step in the ladder is to say, there are others like you who have been equally treated in this unjust way by the same group. So now the person who's walking up this ladder is like, I do have a reason to be angry. They are the enemy. And there's this group that I can join against the same enemy. And you can see how this ladder just keeps on going until it ends with you strap a bomb to yourself and you run into their church and you run into their synagogue and you blow yourself up and now you win. You can see how the ladder plays out, right? The way that you defeat extremism is by taking out the first step in the ladder. You have to take away the injustice. Unfortunately, what's happened since October 7th has created generational repercussions. There will not be a Palestinian for the next 3 generations who does not have a visceral memory. A dead brother, a dead sister, a dead child, a dead mother, a dead grandmother, a dead grandfather, aunts, uncles. There have been so many killed in this attack, in this counterattack since October 7th, that it's left a generational scar that is going to be 50 years worth of work for everybody who gets in on the action to try to resolve this problem. We will have to face and accept that there was an injustice that was carried out and that we can resolve it. So that instead of taking people up a ladder of radicalization, we can take them through a ladder of healing, a ladder of resolution, right? What happened here, what is continuing to happen every day, is fixable. We can't fix what's happened already, but we can fix what we do moving forward. We can give people an option. We can give people solutions, give them outcomes. 60 Minutes can change a life if you give them an outcome. So what outcomes can we reach that changes the whole trajectory of what's happening in the Middle East? We have to be willing to ask ourselves that question. And where the rubber really meets the road, where it gets really uncomfortable for us, is that we have to be willing to accept that mistakes were made, policy mistakes, narrative mistakes, military mistakes, and that we are going to pay the reputational and financial penalty of those mistakes that were made. We have to do that if we're going to really invest in a solution to what's happening in the Middle East. Unfortunately, it is just easier when your neighbors are fighting to just stay out of the fight. But if we really want to stand as the leader of the free world, we have to find a way to create freedom for both peoples in the Middle East. We have to be invested in both peoples in the Middle East, not to mention the fact that the closer we get to the Muslim world, the more secure we will be against Islamic extremism, because we won't be isolated. We won't stand opposite Islam and Muslim evolution and Muslim development. We will find a way to partner with it and not be a world divided by boundaries and faith and religion, but a world that's connected by a common belief in humanity and connection. We can do that. It will be expensive. It will be time consuming. It will be a lot of eating crow and humble pie. But if we can do it for 50 years, that doesn't seem like a long time. Consider the fact that Israel didn't even exist before 1948. Mm. In the annals of time, they're less than 100 years old. They're still a young country. We're still a young country, right? If we can evolve and change and come to our adolescence then certainly they can evolve and change before they even reach their adolescence. Again, maybe that's too ideological, but
I think that it is probably too, it's too idealistic, maybe. It's too Pollyanna. So, but it begs the next question, which is, okay, and using enemy is not probably ideal language, which again is a step in this whole process of thinking through something well, understanding how you have to change your own frame of reference, which I think is going to be a big part of this. But if I were consulting on this project, I would be really trying to understand, okay, what is the mindset of the people that I'm dealing with? What are the things that I know I'm not going to be able to alter? So like the religious angle, I'm going to have to find a way for them to see like a connection or to ignore it. I'm not going to be able to get them to adopt each other's way of thinking. Okay, so I still come back to, we have to have a goal. I think the goal has to be that the Palestinians feel they are in control of their own destiny. I just really look, that is a Western notion that not everybody in the world agrees with. So I'm very open to if that's my fundamental flaw in my thinking, but my thinking is built upon that for them to really have hope in their future and to believe that their children's lives will be better, that they have to feel a sense that they own their own destiny, they control their own lives, they can build the nation the way that they want to. And so I need to understand, given that you have to remove the idea of we're just going to get rid of the Jewish people. You are inviting them to fight tooth and nail, and they're currently so much better at that than you that it's just death knell. So I would take that off the table in terms of it's not going to lead to the outcome I'm going for anyway. So if we take that off the table, then I need to understand why the two-state solution continues to be rejected. Because if it's for religious reasons, then we have to either confront that directly and create a new narrative. One thing that I think people underestimate is the need for off-ramps. And this was something I heard people very wisely talk about with Russia and Ukraine. People were very angry with Putin for invading a sovereign nation, and rightly so. But if you don't give him an off-ramp, where he can save face and look good to his people, you are guaranteeing an escalation.
Correct.
And so while it's gross and it's icky and fucking hateful and nobody wants to do it, it's certainly going to save lives. Again, what's your goal? And if your goal is, I'm perfectly happy for every single Ukrainian to die trying to push back Russia, okay, then if that's your goal, then you're making choices that make sense for that. If that isn't your goal, then putting on the table an off-ramp for Putin would be wise. Right. Because both Zelensky and Putin need off-ramps to be able to go to their people and say, see, we got a victory.
Right.
And so if I were helping advise or negotiate, I'd just be thinking about that. Like, how do I help them each save face? Even if I think one or both of them are horrendous, I'm still going to give them an off-ramp because it's the only way this is going to happen. So I'm thinking, okay, like what are our off-ramps here? How do both sides get to save face and feel like, okay, we quote unquote won this thing and that there's an empowering narrative for both of them. So that has to be found. So whether that is, I'm reading a book right now called Silk Roads, really interesting book. A pretty, and I don't know how accurate it is, so full disclosure, but a really interesting take on history about how East and West have sort of bumped into each other over and over throughout time. And that the author was painting this really fascinating picture where there were a time where there wasn't seen to be a big gap between Muslims and Jews. And I found that very interesting. And they weren't really bothered by the differences in each other's faith. So anyway, I would look into that to see, is there really something there where we can paint a far more united vision, married to an economic reality? Because if we can make their lives better quickly, then suddenly that becomes very interesting. And so marrying it to your idea of, okay, how do we get real infrastructure built so that their lives really are better, whether that's education, better hospitals, better roads. I don't know. Right. There I have nothing but ignorance to offer. But there is a thing you can do
Mm.
that builds a stable entity where you can get food, shelter, water, education, and life starts moving in the right direction. So what are those things? How do you avoid corruption? All that, of course, would be hyper complicated. And I don't know enough about the Abraham Accords. Again, I'm very much a headline reader there, but given how much enthusiasm was going into that and it's economic in nature, can you get that back on track? But you have to do something where you really are giving them a super tangible win.
Yeah, the thing that's missing, I feel like, in a lot of the conversations is to understand that what's happening in Israel is a proxy conflict between Iran and the United States. And
what does Iran want?
Ultimately what Iran wants is a Shia crescent, something they've been after for a long time.
Is it ideological in nature? Is it power in nature?
It's power and landmass. It really is a caliphate.
I don't know what a caliphate is.
A Islamic homeland that stretches beyond Iran, right? And is Shia Islam in nature, not Sunni Islam, which is the predominant Islam throughout the Khaliji and Arabic speaking states. So that's really what Iran wants. And they struggle to get that. And the largest counterbalance to Iran isn't the United States, it's Saudi Arabia. So when you actually hone in on the Middle East, the two big powers like counterbalancing each other are Saudi Arabia and Iran. The United States is just an outside player.
Saudi's a lot bigger than Iran, though, by GDP.
A lot bigger by GDP, a lot bigger by landmass. However, the breadbasket of the Middle East is Iran. The breadbasket of that's so significant, it means that UAE and Oman and Jordan and Saudi Arabia all list Iran as an enemy, but they all get their agriculture from Iran. The cucumbers, the fresh fruit, the vegetables, it's a carve out so that they can continue to have agricultural trade with Iran. Another thing that people don't realize is that there's carve outs all the time.
And that is the power of economics.
That's the power of economics.
Because Iran then could just choke them all off.
Correct.
But they want the money.
Correct. Iran wants some form of income and revenue.
Yeah.
And they've been sanctioned in so many ways. So it's just, to your point about needing an economic and a religious solution, I don't fully disagree, but I would prioritize economics first. Because if you can incentivize people economically, economics runs the world.
Oh, for sure.
If you can incentivize people economically to cooperate, they will find a way for their religions to also cooperate, right? They will find a way to say, hey, you know what? We all come from the same Papa Bear. We all came from everybody, all the nations, they come from us. Like, let's get along. Let's do that, right? That's something that France can't say. That's something the United States can't say. The United States definitely can't say that we come from anybody. We're the bastard children of everybody. We just flocked here, right? So there's absolutely a solution there ideologically. What isn't there is a solution economically. And it's not just about economically incentivizing the Palestinians. It's also about economically incentivizing the Israelis. It takes two sets of economic stimulus, two sets of economic benefits, and even better if they can be economic benefits that are commingled, right? So the more success in Israel, the more success in Palestine, the more success in Palestine, the more success in Israel, right? Create a sense of independence among them. Unfortunately, creating independent partners is something the United States is very bad at. We, since World War II, have specialized in creating dependent partners. That's why NATO doesn't really like us very much anymore. That's why France and Spain and Germany are actively opponents of the United States in NATO, because they realize that what we've really done is made all of Europe dependent on the United States for their technology, for their trade, for their financial solvency. And now the same thing it's difficult for the United States to adopt a different sort of policy than essentially economic bullying. And that's something we're going to have to learn how to do, right? It's something that I think an old generation of capitalists believed that you had to be the biggest in order to be safe. What I think the new era of capitalists is learning is that we can be innovative, successful, financially independent, financially solvent. We can be a lot of things and still be totally safe. because it's only when you're competing for the top space that you're really at risk. Nobody really cares about everybody else who's just, even people who are thriving. People overlook all the people who are thriving. They focus on the very poor and they focus on the very rich. So, I mean, I hope to one day run a $50 million business. And in the eyes of business, that's still small. I think the actual cutoff for small business is $45 million a year. Think about that. You can run a $35 million business and still be classified as a small business.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to compete with $100 billion businesses, or I'm not trying to compete up. I want to make an impact. I want to build wealth. I want to make a difference in the world. I want to leave a legacy for my children. Much like many entrepreneurs, we want to make a splash, but we don't need to make the biggest splash. The United States I believe that the United States is still the best option of all the bad options. We're the best bad option for how the world should lean through superpower dominance. Until a better solution presents itself, I'm going to continue investing in American primacy. That's why my company is an American company, and I couldn't be prouder to pay American taxes, right? Because my business is helping to fund a stronger America. That makes me very proud. It makes me very happy. But there's plenty of Indians and Singaporeans and Thais who are also very proud that their business is building their country.
Proxy wars. How serious is this? There are days where I wake up and I feel like, no, for real, like we are a couple errant missiles from this escalating, and World War III like kicks off in earnest. And the way that I see that playing out is if Iran comes out of the shadows and says, you've gone too far, like we have to step in and do something. And then America has to step in to protect Israel to make good on their promises. And then China starts watching that and goes, the US has drained its surpluses in Ukraine and now in Israel. Now's the time for us to move on Taiwan. They move on Taiwan. And now all hell has broken loose. And you legitimately have a world war. And this is one where, man, I'm a layperson that can draw a pretty believable path to how we get there. And I can only imagine somebody that actually is, I forget what you called it, like read in or whatever, like they're getting like the intelligent briefs, be like, yeah, that's one of the 17 ways that this could escalate and really pop off. Am I falling into conspiracy? Or are we really at a tenuous moment?
We are really at a tenuous moment. That is a yes, hard yes. We are at a tenuous moment. However, what I would say is that what you're falling into is not conspiracy. It's something we call catastrophizing. You're paving the road catastrophic step by catastrophic step, meaning that everybody turns to the most destructive of all solutions before taking a previous step, right? So, for example, for another country to attack for another state actor to attack the sovereignty of the United States is something nobody wants to do. The deterrence that the United States has through their military, through their economic power, through their reach, that what we call a deterrent is so powerful, it prevents people from taking that catastrophic step. The other thing you have to account for is that not every culture approaches conflict the way that America approaches conflict. We are a warring culture. So we're like, blow the shit out of them. We're going to bomb, we're going to kill, we're going to shoot, we're going to get boots on the ground. We need tanks, we need rifles, we need everything, right? Sun Tzu does not operate that way. The entire Chinese Politburo, the whole Chinese PLA doesn't operate that way. They're not a boots on the ground, kick them in, whatever else. They are a long, slow death by 1,000 cuts. We are a hacksaw, chainsaw, shoot 'em up, cut 'em up country, right? So you've also got Iran in there. You've got Russia in there. You've got Israel in there. You've got Saudi Arabia in there. You've got France, Germany, the UK, all these other big players. They're all in there with their own take on how conflict should escalate and how conflict should be carried out. So when you catastrophize, you take the presumptive path that everybody leaps to the most catastrophic decision, whereas you have to bake into that some level of probability. The highest probability is that no country will attack the sovereignty of the United States. Highest probability. right? Nobody will attack the sovereignty of the United States. So you and me are safe inside American borders. That does not mean that Americans are safe outside of American borders. But then you start getting into the realm of extremism and targeted violence against Americans because of ideological or other purposes. That becomes proxy, right? So now when Americans are attacked in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, simply because they're American, and they're attacked by Congolese who are funded by, you name the country, you name Russia, North Korea, like whatever, Iran. Now that becomes murky. Murky is exactly what the world wants when it comes to conflict with the United States. Because if it's murky, the United States has a hard time justifying any kind of response that goes state to state, because there's no smoking gun, right? It becomes just difficult enough. There's plausible deniability. And that's exactly what you're seeing play out here. So again, going back to the whole idea, when you reference World War III happening, when most people reference World War III happening, what they're actually talking about is a nuclear war similar to how World War II ended. Wars evolve like people evolve. And if anything, if you've seen the evolution of technology, you can imagine how much more advanced World War III will be than World War II. All wars, from civil to World War II, were all fought, Vietnam and beyond, were all fought over economics. So if there's a more economically viable way to execute warfare, that is how people will execute warfare. Proxy wars are a very economically viable way to execute wars. Economic wars are a very economically viable way to execute wars. When the United States cut off Russian bank accounts as part of their sanctions against Russia, and they cut off access to Russian funds that were denominated in euros and dollars, that was an economic warfare move. When China floods the market with US dollars and buys yuan or renminbi off the market to change their valuation, that's an act of economic warfare. That is conflict that is so much more cheaper and viable and creates less stress and public response than actually sending your citizens to die at the end of a bullet or a rocket launch, right? So we have to accept that the probability is much higher that we will continue to see increasing proxy conflict, increasing economic conflict, and solutions other than what we call interstate conflict, or conflict between two sovereign nation states. It's very surprising what Russia did in Ukraine, very surprising, because interstate war like that has almost been like eradicated. The last time that a country invaded another sovereign country was when the United States invaded Afghanistan in 2003, right? There's 20-something years where no country had invaded another country. Lots of civil war, but no interstate. So lots of intra-state war, civil war, but no interstate war. So it was a huge turn away from popular military doctrine. But, Putin was playing certain odds, and I think what we're all discovering now is what he really cares about is Eastern Ukraine, where, the predominance of their energy flow goes through, and that's what he's got right now. So I would say that if you take the catastrophizing off the table and you look at probabilities, we will continue to see more proxy wars in more third world countries where the United States has to fund one side and China or Russia or Iran have to fund the opposite side, and they'll keep vying for influence because economically speaking, the country with the most markets to expand into will be the future economic powerhouse of the world. And economic power is what becomes the investment for military power. And that's why the United States is dominant. We've had the economic power to invest in a modern, large military. Only country who's competing with us is China. And the only reason they even have a chance to compete with us is because for 20 years, we were heads down focusing on the global war on terror. China didn't participate in the global war on terror. They spent 20 years with their heads up, stealing secrets and building infrastructure, so that when we finally looked up, we realized, oh shit, like they're growing fast and we got to change something.
Elon Musk says over the last, 20 years that the architecture in China has become far more impressive than what's happening in the US. What do you think the US would look like had we taken all that foreign aid that we've been sending to wars, and not just foreign aid, but to fight the wars, but also to proxy war? Would it look dramatically different?
Yeah, I think the United States would look very, very different. I think we would see, I'm not saying that I think it would look necessarily better, but I am saying it would look very different. Keep in mind that a lot of the investment that went into Chinese infrastructure, was investment into state surveillance systems, tracking populations, tracking state IDs, making sure people stayed in their lane and were only given the opportunities that the state just thought they deserved. I don't think that that's the direction we as Americans would want to go.
I hope not.
But if we were to have taken the hundreds of billions that we spent in our wars abroad and put them into national security and other devices here in the US, for all we know, that could have been one of the options that we pursued, was a large-scale state-wide security system that on the piggyback of that is a state surveillance system, very similar to what you see actually in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
That's really interesting. When you first said that it would look different, but you're not sure it would look better, I was like, where is he going with this? That is very interesting. And yes, right now people seem to be way more interested in safety than they do freedom, which it's funny because as a kid, I mean, we have a state, New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, live free or die is the state motto. And people now are like, what do you mean? Like, of course, safety is more important than freedom. Like it's flipped so hard from what it was like when I was a kid. When I was a kid, man, it was all about that. Like, give me freedom or give me death. Like I remember, I think that's the line that, in Braveheart, when he said, you can take my life, but you can't take our freedom or something like that. Man, it's a different vibe now.
Did I, tell me if I'm repeating myself, but did I walk you through the civilization pyramid the last time I was here?
Ooh, I've heard you in so many different places. I can't tell you if it was here or not, but please give us a refresher.
So I feel like what's happening is we're seeing the civilization pyramid actually play out. And the civilization pyramid is a pyramid that talks about exactly what you're describing, the exchange of freedom and security. The bottom of the pyramid is all of our individualism, right? You hunt and gather for you. I hunt and gather for me. You live in your cave. I live in my cave. And I don't have any say in what you do. You don't have any say in what I do. And if we need to fight, then let's fight to the death. Individualism at the bottom end of that pyramid, where we all started, where some countries still very much are, right? Moving up the pyramid, the next tier is tribalism, which is like, hey, our caves are next to each other. You're really good at hunting and gathering. I'm really good at gathering. Let's team up. And now we'll capture efficiencies because if you're ever sick, I can make sure I collect enough food for both of us. And if I'm ever sick, you can make sure there's enough food for both of us. So now as a tribe, we're safer, and to hell with the other tribes. If they come across the river, if they start hunting our buffalo, we'll kill them. So it's a step above individualism. It gives us some efficiency because we have scalability. It gives us some security because we have each other, and we're united under the banner of a tribe. The next and final peer level of the pyramid is the state. And as you move up from individualism to the state, you start to give up your independent freedoms. But in exchange, the state is able to push down scalable efficiencies and solutions. So now there's a standing military that keeps you safe. Now there's public utilities that bring you water. Now there's hospitals that bring you medicine. Now there's insurance. Now there's businesses. Now there's bakeries. Now there's all this stuff that the state helps to facilitate so that you don't have to depend on your tribe. In fact, if you want to live in California or in Austin, Texas, or in Florida or in New York, you can pick your tribe. You can pick where you want to go because you're all part of the state. If you take the state off the top of the pyramid and you move the rest of the pyramid aside, you have another pyramid. And that's different levels of the state, right? So at the bottom tier of the state, you basically have your organized state the government's very small and it gives people maximum freedom. And, it's your political parties that don't want to interfere with anybody else's political party. And then as you move up, you have what we consider to be like conservative state management, which is, we have enough government, but not too much government. It creates guidelines, but not heavily regulated. We focus on maximizing efficiency. We minimize policing our people, right? And then you have the highest level of the state, which is very much your kind of socialist or authoritarian state, where everything is regulated, everything is heavily managed, everything is heavily policed. So when you put this smaller pyramid back on top of the original pyramid, you have 6 levels of civilization, basically, right? The theme with all of it is that as you climb the pyramid, you are giving up freedoms in exchange for efficiencies. The beautiful thing about the United States is that we are a country where we slow down our political processes because we have 2 parties that are always fighting and vying, right? So that forces us to slow down, which usually results in a more popular, more well thought out solution, even though we haven't quite seen it play out that way recently. But we slow down the velocity so we make better, stronger decisions that are more time tested. But we also give individuals the right to move up and down the pyramid as they choose. So if you want to be a prepper in Kentucky that lives off the grid, you go right down the pyramid and there you go. You can. If you want to be a hyper, socialist, publicly declared communist that lives in whatever, New York, you can. And both people are protected by the laws of the land, but they live at different parts of the pyramid. So to your point, I feel like we are absolutely at this precipice in world events where we have to kind of decide what we want to do as individuals. But the larger question is, as individuals, we all also have a say in what we do as a nation. And that is going to be the larger impact on what we leave behind.
Yeah. And I'm interested, to be sure. I am a little worried about what's going to happen in 2024. I won't lie. If it ends up being a Trump-Biden runoff, what do you think happens, especially if Trump wins?
I think that if you're not preparing for that eventuality, it would be wise to prepare for that eventuality. The highest 2 probabilities are that either Trump wins the presidency or Biden wins the presidency. So just speaking practically again, mentally, as a business owner, as a father, as a husband, I'm preparing for one of these 2 things. There's a 90% chance that one of these 2 things is going to happen. So let me be ready for that. And then the last 10%, I'll let surprise me, right? But I mean, who knows? It's difficult. It's also important to understand that we all focus on the president. What powers the president has are granted to them by the legislative branch. We've gone through about a 30-year period where our legislative branch has been giving more power to the executive branch, specifically because the legislative branch is trying to cover their own ass. They want to be lifetime legislators. They don't want to be responsible for the people, and they don't want to be accountable to the people. So instead, they want to be able to say, you voted me into office, and the president doesn't let me do my job because I gave him all of my authority. So part of what we need to do is see the legislative branch take back the power from the president, which they can do with a vote. The president doesn't need to give them power back. They can take power back, but they do need to give the president power. He can't take power from the legislative branch. So in both cases, whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump, the real impact there is just how the world sees the United States. And then the fact that both presidents have the right to build their cabinet however they choose to build their cabinet. So they both are going to bring in their cronies. They're both going to bring in their yes people. They're both going to bring in people who are biased towards their own political futures. Nobody really at the top is thinking about what's in the best interest of the American people, because we've created this self-licking ice cream cone where politics is about rewarding the politician with politics instead of there's no incentive to serve the American people, especially not when the American people are split like we're split right now. So it's tough, man. It's tough. And I will say that what my wife and I keep an eye on is it's less about whether or not Donald Trump becomes president, and it's more about how will individuals exercise their legal powers? How will individuals exercise their civic responsibilities when the outcome is announced?
That's a fancy way of saying something.
Yeah. Will they revolt?
There we go.
Or will they go to the fucking table and vote every 2 years on the lowest levels of government so that you can actually affect a change in the government? Like it breaks my heart when I see Americans bitch, complain, and picket, let alone when I see them shoot and raid and invade, right? All of that stuff is something that we should be past. what we should be doing now is exercising our civic rights, our civic duties, our civic powers, because we have the power to affect everything up the chain if we just exercise it, if we're willing to let things slow down, and if we're willing to cut out some of the volume and actually do things the way that has always made America great. We've always been stronger because we have a bureaucratic process that allows us to slow things down, allows us all the time and the space to learn and ingest and accept and internalize what we believe to be true. When we move at lightning speed, we can be duped, we can be confused, we can be tricked. Let ourselves slow down. Embrace the fact that we slow down. If we didn't slow down, we'd be fucking China. An authoritarian rule where literally things change at the drop of one person's public announcement. We don't want that. We don't want that. We want something different.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 100% on board with that. So as you look at this with your analyst eyes, what do you think will be the reaction to, let's say, Trump getting elected? Because my concern is when watching the Sam Harris thing happen on the internet, I don't know how closely you paid attention to that, but basically the entire internet turned on what I think is one of the smartest, most thoughtful people. I think he's wrong, but to your point about you want to triangulate anyway, you're not just going to listen to one person. Sam is right about so many things. But I believe I understand Sam maybe better than a lot of people in that the thing that Sam believes is that Donald Trump is an existential threat. And when someone becomes an existential threat, meaning it could wipe out humanity, I want to be very clear about what an existential threat is, that it's a whole new set of rules, baby. And you do whatever you have to do. And that if Sam, who is incredibly smart and extremely thoughtful, and I think a hyper-moral person, but I also think he's wrong about this. So my thing is, okay, I think the real problem we have is we don't agree on what constitutes an existential threat. I actually don't know that we disagree about what to do in the face of a true existential threat. But like when I look at Trump getting elected, I'm like, please, Jesus, no. But at the same time, I don't see it as an existential threat. So, and I look at like, we had 4 years with him. The world didn't end, everybody. Like, but at the same time, other people look at it and like, bro, we dodged a nuclear weapon. Like, what are you talking? Like, it could be the end of humanity if he gets elected again. That freaks me out. The fact that people think, hey, him getting elected could end the world. Now, if this were like fringe crazies, I'd be like, whatever.
Yeah.
This is coming from some of the smartest people I know that they're very good at thinking through problems. So of course, part of me goes, is he an existential threat? Like, I don't think I'm the arbiter, right? So I'm captain, distrust yourself. But so the only thing I'm saying is when I analyze the situation, there are enough people that believe that he is an actual existential threat that if he gets elected, I think you have a problem. I don't think, look, I'm a big believer that America's freakishly resilient. I don't think it collapses. But do I think that at a minimum, we take another step towards a civil war? Yes, I really do. That one really freaks me out. Like I can buy into the proxy wars that World War III is going to be fought very surreptitiously. There won't be as much hot to the war. Okay, don't love it. Still very high stakes, still makes me very tense, but that's a lot better than say a World War II. But dude, in the summer of 2020, I sat on my balcony and watched LA burn. And that wasn't even around existential threats, right? So yeah, I don't know. And I don't know what's worse. And again, I'll ask you with your CIA analyst hat on, what's worse, Trump getting elected or Trump not getting elected?
So I'll start by saying that I disagree with all the smart people that you're referencing right now. And I would gladly...
Who think he's an existential threat?
Yes, I would gladly sit in front of anybody who believes that Trump is an existential threat and have a healthy debate on any topic they want to talk about. Because I have actually seen existential threats and Trump is not that.
Can you paint an existential threat picture?
An existential threat is imminent. It means that it is the last step before the holistic destruction, the existence, destroying from existence the target that it is threatening, right? So let's consider a battleship, right? A hypersonic cruise missile will destroy a battleship, right? It is not an existential threat to the battleship. Even though it will destroy the battleship, it is not an existential threat to the battleship, because if even one soldier survives, the memory of that battleship in current memory still exists. Not to mention all of the documentation about the battleship existing, and then they rebuild a new one, they give it the same moniker, and it's right back in service again, right? It is a perilous threat. It is not an existential threat. Truly existential threats are things that will wipe you off the face of the earth, right? Iran wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That is an existential threat. And when they say that, when they announced that, they were talking about Israel, the state, and Jews. They want to destroy them. Nazi Germany posed an existential threat to the Jewish faith. Literally a systematic commitment to destroying an entire generation, like the entire existence of it forever, taking it off the world stage forever. That is an existential threat. What happens is that we have become spoiled in our terminology. Catastrophizing has become so common that now, to get people emotional, to get people to move on their beliefs, you have to ramp everything up. To get past the volume and the velocity of data, you have to say the next most extreme thing. When you say the most extreme thing long enough, if you call yourself stupid enough times, guess what you start to believe? You start to believe you're stupid. Right. So when you tell people enough times, it's an existential threat, it's an existential threat, it's an existential threat, you start to actually believe, wow, maybe it really is an existential threat, without stopping to think. In one presidency, no president, Trump or anybody, no president can disband two of the three branches. The only thing the president can really do is write an executive order about the executive branch. If our Congress exists, we exist. If our judicial branch exists, we exist, right? And the other two branches are there to keep the executive branch in power. So one 4-year presidency, one 8-year presidency, two 8-year presidencies with President Trump is not, with a future President Trump, is not going to be the end of America. Could it do significant damage? Absolutely. But it's not an existential threat. It just isn't. It doesn't threaten to end the United States. It threatens to make life difficult, but lots of things threaten to make life difficult. We can't guarantee that Trump comes into office and somehow everything changes for the better. Who knows? We don't actually know. There's a term that we use in intelligence operations called the cone of uncertainty. And if you imagine like a funnel or a cone or a pennant, whatever, it's a certain shape. The timeline of known reality goes right up to the beginning of the cone. And then where you see the actual cone, that becomes an area of predictable confidence that you can guess within. But where that cone ends, everything past the cone is totally unpredictable. You have no confidence about what will happen one way or the other. So unless there is an existential threat, threatening the existence and future existence of something within that cone, then you can't really take it as a level of confidence one way or the other. So my recommendation to those people catastrophizing and everybody who's feeling that pressure, that anxiety, have a plan for when Donald Trump is announced as the winner of the presidency. Have a plan for it. Hope and vote against it all you want, but don't let it happen without a plan for what to do next. We have a plan for what to do next. Our plan takes us out of the United States. If Donald Trump becomes the president and our country takes a turn for the worse, we're leaving the United States. We already have the plan. If Joseph Biden wins the presidency and the United States takes a turn for the worse, we're leaving the United States. That's our plan. Doesn't mean that we're not proud to be Americans. It just means that where we are in our lives, with our children, with our business, with what we're trying to do in our personal mission, it is not to fix the United States right now. We'll let other people who are passionate about that fix the United States right now. We're going to go grow our family and take care of our family, grow our business, grow our impact, pay our taxes, and make sure the United States has the resources it needs to get through its adolescence. but other people are very dedicated to being part of the solution right now. And I applaud those people, and I want to give them the resources they need to be that level of impact.
It's interesting when you said earlier that you really believed in the supremacy of the U.S. I knew that you planned to leave. I thought it was a longer timeline than that. That's very interesting. So that tells me that you think that, well, let me not put words in your mouth. Are you saying that if one of those two gets elected, that there is a distressingly high probability of a bad turn?
Yes, I would agree with that statement completely.
Okay.
Regardless of which two, we're picking between two bad options. And that's just where we are right now. Unfortunately, I think there are good options on the table.
Who?
One of the options that I would actually personally love to see take the presidency is Nikki Haley.
I don't even know who that is.
And
I hear
and that's why she's
name.
not going to win.
So I hear her name all the time. I'm going to have to watch something. I don't know what she looks like. Never heard her voice.
I think of all the things that the country could really benefit from right now, it's a female, level-headed centrist. And even though she runs on the Republican ticket, she is very much her narrative is a very centrist narrative. And I really like the idea of our country kind of coming out of this 8-year disaster by showing that one of the things that makes us so powerful is our diversity. And I think we are at a time now where a strong female leader would be welcomed here. Unfortunately, I think that Hillary Clinton, in many of the years that she was running, wasn't the right fit at the right time. I think Nikki Haley might be different than that, but that doesn't mean she's got any traction. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it is one of those 10% outcomes where all of a sudden I see like sunlight instead of more rain and snow.
Did she run last cycle?
No, it's the first time she's run. And unfortunately, she's showing a lot of the neophyte,
Making classic mistakes.
Yeah. Arguing over petty stuff and debates and blah, 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 blah. And not really showing that she's above all that. And to be president, you've got to be above all that frivolity. Right. Either you've got to do the Obama approach and just not address it, or you've got to do the Trump approach and address it jovially and make light of it.
Jovially. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I got the best words. Right. I've got the best words. I'm the best.
No one's ever had words this good. I cannot do an impression to save my life. But the way he talks is hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of Vivek Ramaswamy?
I wanted to like Vivek a lot.
But you don't.
I wanted to like him a lot. I still think that he's made so many positive impressions on me, but at the same time, he's not been consistent in terms of the positive impressions, right? Picking fights with Nikki Haley over silly things like TikTok and personal attacks on her family. Come on, man. You've got to act presidential. I loved when he came out of the gates. He's prepared. He's a minority. He's young. So many things there that anybody could rally behind and love. But then there's these behavioral challenges where you're like, dude, the last thing I want to do is have you be negotiating with the Prince of Saudi Arabia and you're going to jab him on one of his wives. Like, no, that's not a good idea for us. No, thank you. Right. Again, neophyte beginner kind of error that he's going to try to fix up. But that's where we are right now. And again, going back to the original question, there is a very solid chance that a Trump or a Biden presidency is going to change its course, even 15 or 30 degrees, change its course, focus on American needs, focus on American economy, maybe even apologize for bad calls in the past. Who knows?
Good luck with that one.
But they can change the course and make significant benefits. But if they stay their course, then it's just more pain for all of us. And we can't stand by idly and let that happen. The pyramid, the civilization pyramid is not worth just sitting by and being silent. We have a chance to impact our state. We should.
Yeah, no doubt. I think a lot of people are going to try to have impact during this election cycle. I want to know, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but how much do you think manipulative tactics will be used on social media to sway? I'm not even worried about necessarily foreign influence, just like the Twitter files. In fact, I have a quote that I want to read about the time we're living in now. This is from Eric Weinstein. Shout out to Eric, who I love dearly. I think he's an incredible human. His quote is, "We now know, post Elon Musk's $44 billion adventure at Twitter, that there are these coordinating groups coordinating social media with the intelligence community or with the Department of Homeland Security or the State Department. We now know that we're living in an orchestrated, curated, choreographed world."
We've always known that. We just haven't admitted it. And let's keep this in mind too. As much as people want to say that that's a bad thing, that social media again, social media is not media. Social media, what I mean by that is social media is not journalism. Social media is entertainment that's socially generated. It's essentially just like a jukebox, right? It's a business. We, of course, want the intelligence community, the national security infrastructure of the United States, hip and hip with American businesses, because that's how we will that's our most vulnerable place to foreign threats, is through our economics. So when you take away the fact that Facebook and Twitter are massive social voices because everybody uses them, and you just consider the fact that they're a business, it makes perfect sense that you would want a business hip and hip with the national security sector so that they can counter any foreign efforts to impact American economics. We don't think of it that way. We think of it like, no, free speech and freedom of choice, and they shouldn't have a say in what gets published and what doesn't get published. At the same time, when Russia uses Facebook to create influence campaigns, who do we blame? We blame Facebook, and we blame the intelligence infrastructure for not protecting us. Again, Americans are a warring culture, and we want to believe that we are entitled to everyone else's fucking secrets, but nobody's entitled to our secrets. And it's a dichotomy that we can't seem to fuse together, right? Either there are no secrets or there are secrets. You don't get to choose which secrets you get and which secrets you don't. If anybody gets to make that choice, it really should be a organization of institutionalized legislative, judicial, and executive powers, because we voted those powers to be in control of our secrets. If you don't like that, change your vote, right? Mm-hmm. So for sure, we will be influenced by these sectors into our social life. Absolutely. We already are. We will continue to be, and it will continue forever. It's not different from what we've seen in the past. What were hate ads on TV? What are flyers that come in the mail? What is people knocking on your door and getting you to sign petitions? All those are all forms of influence and an effort to sway public opinion and an effort to get top of mind for some politician. It's always been there. It just changed media format. It just makes us pissy that it happens by foreign actors and domestic actors on social media, because we forget the fact that social media is not fucking news. It's not journalism. It's not vetted. It's not reviewed. There's no professional criteria. It is entertainment. That's what it was always meant to be. It was always meant to be dancing babies and kitten videos and stunts on motorcycles. That's what it was meant to be. It's just turned into the fact that people don't do enough interesting shit, that now what they do instead is they forward articles that they only read the headline, and it makes them emotional. So they forward more and more of them, and people like it and thumbs up it and comment on it without actually reading the article. They just read the headline. You took time out of this interview to speak to the people before they made comments because you care about making sure that people understand what we're talking about, not just read a headline, knee-jerk reaction, create virality. That's not what we're going for. But that is what ends up happening on social media. That, going back to our conversation about covert influence, that's exactly what covert influence wants. It wants to find two existing causes that all they need is a little bit of extra gasoline and they light up. Social media is the perfect place. Light up the left, light up the right. Light up the left, light up the right. And all of a sudden, people don't know what's true and what's false, and they're fighting against each other. I don't believe that will turn into civil war fighting. I think it takes a lot more before we start pulling guns on each other. But it does cause enough chaos and delay, and it hampers our progress enough that we will lose influence on the global stage.
Not ideal. What do you think is going to happen with AI? because all of that feels like it gets supercharged to a level that is unimaginable when you have AI. You talk about volume. You can now put out 150,000 Trump clips a day that aren't him, but look and sound like him. And even if they're meant as parody, people will start believing them. I can't tell you the number of times I made the mistake of, actually, I don't even think I follow it, but I probably liked something at one point, the Elon Musk parody account. And I will routinely forget to check whether it's him or the parody account. And even though it's right there, I'm just like, oh shit, like I can't believe he just said that. Oh wait, it's the parody account.
Yeah.
And so I think, how often did I not notice that that was the parody account? And so when you've got, take someone like my mom, God bless her cotton socks, she won't notice that something, because I can tell when something is AI generated, it's off just enough. My mom won't.
I'm optimistic about AI. I'll be one of the few people that say it, because I think that our greatest breakthroughs are still ahead of us because of AI. I think that all of the fatalistic thinking, all the catastrophizing about AI is from our analytical overlay and what we've been conditioned to believe from videos and books and sci-fi, right? Sentient AI that determines that human beings are the worst thing for human beings, so they eradicate us. Do I believe that AI will be used for influence, for politics, for local government? Do I think it'll be abused? Absolutely, it'll be abused. Just like TV was abused, just like radio was abused, just like newspaper articles were abused. I mean, just like the internet's abused. For sure, it'll go in that way, and then it'll be regulated back, or the market will prove that it's not profitable to create that much junk, that amidst all the junk that you're creating, your real value can't shine through, so people will stop creating junk and they'll start creating more meaningful stuff. So if AI, just imagine, if AI could be used to expand the reach of nonprofits trying to solve cancer, so that instead of their minimal media team creating 5 posts a week, they could create 150 posts a week. And that 150 posts turn into a 200% increase in funding for cancer research.
Yeah, I'm super pro AI. Like I am stamped on the accelerator. I love it the most.
Yep.
But I am also aware of, just based on the things we've been able to create in-house, not in the vein that I'm talking about, but you see how real it is and how quickly you can confuse people, that it's just going back to the volume velocity problem. It will be used to have a clip of Biden falling down, stumbling and sounding ridiculous. It will be used to have Trump spout crazy lies and outrageous shit. And then what I think will happen is people are going to have to end up using the blockchain as a way to watermark these so that you can prove which ones are legit, not legit. And so the old thing, I'm Tom Bilyeu and I approve this message kind of thing at the end will be replaced with, that's really just their mark on the blockchain. And so people embedded in Twitter, now X, whatever, it will just automatically say, yes, this is an official message. No, it's not, whatever. I think it will end up having to be something like that. But I think this is the year where it becomes a big enough problem that then those solutions have to be put in place. Bad timing for that to happen because now you can really sway public perception. And so this gets, one of the reasons I want to have you back on, not only do I just absolutely, I haven't even looked at the clock and I know we're fucking deep in, just beyond fun. But when I think about having a perspective on some of these just like gruelingly difficult things, you've got such an interesting take on the different ways that these could go and probabilities and all that. But yeah, I think 2024 has a probability of being squirrely, and that people need to not allow themselves. This is me talking to my past self. For anybody wondering why I changed the show, I started changing my show about 4 years ago now. And it was because I realized I had been so heads down on an entrepreneurial journey that I didn't even understand the world at large. I only understood it in as much as I needed to build a business. And then when COVID hit, I was just like, whoa, this is not the world I thought I was living in. And so all of a sudden I was like, okay, my prediction engine is completely broken. And that means I've connected dots in an erroneous way. I now need to completely remap the territory. And that sent me down a journey of like, oh, I need to understand how the world works. What is the essence of the game? Who are the players? What are the pieces that are on the chessboard so that I can really understand this? And so as I look at 2024, make predictions. They will mostly be wrong, but they'll be directionally useful at a minimum. And so this is one of those things that I really think people need to load up into their working memory about what do they need to be aware of. How can AI be used as a tool in your business, as a tool in your life? How can it be used to manipulate you? How do you encounter a problem you've never seen before and think well through it so that you're not just primed by the person you're sitting across, and now they've trapped you in an answer and you're stuck and you're like, wait, how did I end? I don't even believe that. What just happened? Right? But you've said this a lot, and I really agree with this, that if you understand the tools and tactics, you're way less likely to be used by them. And so you can begin to escape that stuff. So speaking of, there's one thing that by way of stories, I think has really captured people's imagination and becomes a bit of a litmus test of what the hell is going on. And that's Epstein. So this is somebody I'm very curious to get your take as a former spy. Eric Weinstein, he never comes out and says the exact words, but he's basically saying that the literal words he uses are, this guy is a construct of someone else. Someone else created this guy that we call Jeffrey Epstein. And so my question becomes, then the internet runs with that. I don't know what Eric thinks beyond that exact statement, but the internet certainly runs with, all right, this guy's a CIA operative designed to get intelligence on people like Bill Clinton, which is why you have a painting of Bill Clinton wearing a dress in the man's foyer, which is weird. And I'll admit, I try not to jump to conclusions, but that's a bad look, man. And so is he a real guy? Is he a CIA plant? Like what do you see? What does the data say?
I don't have enough data to say what the data says. What I do have is enough information to pull on assessments that I think have a reasonable probability. CIA does not operate the way most people think that CIA operates. And CIA would never have the legal jurisdiction or the incentive to spy on an American president.
But do they have the legal jurisdiction to sell drugs? Which they do. We know that.
Do you know who the ultimate power is over CIA? Which branch of government? The executive branch. So
if he says it's cool to sell drugs, then it's cool
we
to
sell drugs.
Yo.
Dude, we do things that are classified for a reason.
Wow.
And we do it all in the best interest of protecting Americans. And I mean, I am the kind of person that's practical to a fault.
Right.
So if you tell me that I can either sell cocaine to impoverished Latin American countries or watch 100 Americans die, I'm a cocaine dealer.
Wow.
I'm just the way I work, dude. Like, just like
you are honest. I appreciate that.
The lives here are more valuable to me than the lives here. That's just, I know that makes me sound however that makes me sound, but that's just the way that's the way I'm wired. That's my analytical overlay.
Yeah.
So I have zero reason to believe and zero evidence to believe, zero experience to believe that Epstein is not a real person or was some kind of CIA manufactured plant or was a CIA asset or a CIA resource. Zero reason to believe any of those things.
What about foreign?
However,
here we go.
However, I have lots of reasons and lots of experience to make me believe that he was a intelligence resource for someone else. He may have been a resource for FBI because that's a whole different authority that's granted on investigating criminal activity inside the United States. And they work with shady people, they work with criminals, they work with sources of all kinds. So he may have had a relationship with FBI. I can't speak to that, but definitely not CIA. However, if I was an intelligence officer in any of the leading intelligence services, the French, the Israelis, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, if I was an intelligence source for Germany, if I was an intelligence officer in any country that was interested in what's happening in the United States, I would 100% have devoted time and energy into tracking and trying to recruit Epstein into my asset of reporting sources because he had access, such privileged access. And he was so malleable in terms of what he needed and what he wanted so that he could be controlled. Those two things are exactly what you're looking for in the dream boat asset. You want someone who can be controlled by simple levers and someone who has incredible access. Those two things together make a dream boat case. And I mean, even for an unsophisticated service, right? Like your unsophisticated services being Ecuador or Panama or, you know, Romania. Those are basic services, basic intelligence services. Your really refined, really talented services like Cuba, like MSS in China, like the SVR in Russia. Those services could absolutely make someone like that sing and keep him well fed and well versed in the things that he needed, and get incredible access back from him. And then when the natural course of American judicial process takes place, they can distance themselves from him as much as they need to, right? Because he's definitely not going to come out and be like, actually, guys, don't convict me because I'm reporting to the Russians. No, he's never going to say it. So it's all the hallmarks of a very good intelligence case carried out by a foreign country. Doesn't mean it is. It just has all those hallmarks. But a misinformed American public who is irrationally focused on CIA conspiracies, they see something that does look and feel like an intelligence operation, but they attribute it to CIA because of their analytical overlay from movies and TV, instead of attributing it to a truly adversarial service that could execute an operation like that.
What are the hallmarks that you see that really make you go, can't guarantee it, but damn?
The access. The fact that he was so close to so many people on both sides of the political debate, right? Conservatives and liberals. And he participated in extremely compromising behaviors with both sides. That doesn't happen unless either you are so disconnected from the American experience that you really do see everybody as just a tool, or you've been directed to build those relationships and incentivized to build those relationships and rewarded for building those relationships, because it takes a lot of effort. It takes effort to find common ground between very far-leaning people. And then it takes effort to build your life around being available to them when they're available, and then orchestrating these compromising activities. That takes so much time and effort. It's just not something that normal people participate in. Even the very wealthy come to a point where they're like, I could spend an hour with this guy, or I could spend an hour doing this other thing that's even more productive. And they will rationalize their way away against socializing and into business or something other more productive venture, right? So the access is the biggest thing. And then the second biggest thing is the incredible amount of compromising behavior that he participated in. Like even your kinkiest, craziest people who don't follow any kind of moral or ethical compass, right? Even those folks have a hard time functioning at that level and also participating in that much compromising activity. That's documented, right? Like oftentimes to get to a place where you're that morally and ethically flexible, you're not functional in other ways. He was somehow both. So he could have just been a very unique human being. I'm not going to say he wasn't, but probability-wise, he was probably helped or directed in that way, not necessarily magically gifted, but there's still a chance.
Now, it's interesting. That's one of the things Eric speaks to, is that so Eric was heavily involved in finance and trading, and he met him and he was like, there's no way that guy knew the first thing about trading. He was like, there's no way. Like, you talk to him for 30 seconds and you're like, what is happening? How, this guy doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. Yeah. He's like, he basically word salads his way through stuff. He likens him to, if you've ever seen that meme with Steve Buscemi, who walks in, hello, fellow kids. And he's, 46 years old with a skateboard over his back. He said it was like that with trading, which I found hilarious.
So that what you're explaining to me now makes a third hallmark, because a third hallmark of an intelligence asset that's aided in their intelligence success is that they don't know what they're talking about. They end up in positions where they thrive and survive just off of their con game, their confidence. So eventually people just rationalize that this person doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, but I don't really care because they're a good time. So let's have a good time and let's not have any meaningful conversation. Perfect opportunity, because guess what that intelligence asset has to do? All they have to do is listen to the intelligent conversations between two people and provide that intelligence to someone else, or get them to participate in compromising behavior that they can use for either blackmail or some sort of documentation for the potential future, or, grab a phone or grab a laptop, or, let somebody into the party who's a trained intelligence operative to meet the other cases. Like, there's so many ways an intelligence officer can use an access agent and or a foreign reporting agent who has the kind of access and control levers that Epstein had.
How often is sex used to get people in compromising positions?
In the United States, often. We are a sexually repressed culture. You have to consider
Really?
that. You've traveled the world.
Yeah, but damn, it's not like I see people dry humping on the couch in Europe. It's like,
But you do see nude ads in Europe.
I guess a little bit.
Yeah.
Bro, I got some sites if you want to see porn in the US. Like, you can find porn everywhere.
You can't find it everywhere. That's what's so interesting. You can find it, but you can't find it everywhere, right? Just think about social media. You can't post nudes on social media, at least not easily, and at least not for very long. I don't know if X you can. X is a whole different world right now, right? But that just goes to show, like, we believe in monogamy. We believe in traditional marriage. We struggle to accept gay marriage. We struggle to accept non-traditional relationships. Like, we have a long, fat history of conservative sexual values. Maybe that's changing, but it's still very much something that we struggle with right now. Whereas in Latin America, in Europe, in Asia, prostitution is legal. Sexual escorts is legal. Three-way relationships are common, like old and young relationships, like sugar daddies and sugar mamas, all very common, if not culturally preferable. Where here, we don't have any of that. So the end result of that is that we have such a confined sexual culture that when people have strong sexual energy that they can't exercise, when they're given an opportunity to exercise that vice, they take it and they jump at it, which is part of the reason that we have the issues that we have with porn addiction here, and the issues that we have with adultery here, and the issues that we have with human trafficking in the United States, right? Because people are looking for a way to exercise this vice that everywhere else in the world is acceptable.
That's interesting. Yeah. I have not thought of us as sexually repressed, but I hear what you're saying. Compared to the Middle East, though.
Oh, yeah. But you're talking about Sharia law in most of the Middle East still.
Like, it's pretty hardcore. You have said, speaking of sex, that spies have the best sex. Tell me more.
A big part of being a spy is learning to accept your vices, right? And there are predominantly in our lexicon, there are really three vices. There's drugs and alcohol. That's vice number one, which is essentially a dampening of anxiety and a dampening of stress and whatever else. That's the first vice. The second vice is greed or fame, right? Wanting something material to enhance yourself. And then the third vice is sex. And really, sex is a vice that's connected to intimacy and individual connection, right? We categorize them as sex. So these are three human vices that are international, and that we all learn about all people, so that when we come to break down how people tick, you also want to break down what vice they lean towards. And sometimes their vice changes as you age, but usually your vice is pretty consistent for your entire life. And everybody listening right now is immediately saying, that's my vice, that's my vice, that's my vice, that's my vice. At CIA, fame and greed can't be one of your vices. So they kind of rule that out early on in the
because you'd be too easy to like flip.
Because that's not a job that lends itself to fame or greed. There are people who are flipped on greed later on, but it's because they believe that they're worth more than what they're making, right? And that's your Aldrich Ameses of the world and your Richard Hansons of the world. Your people who compromise themselves to a foreign power in exchange for a paycheck.
Right.
But in every case of a converted American asset, there was also an element of sex. because what happens is the people that are attracted to the kind of dangerous work that happens at CIA are people who are attracted to high stress, and they don't have a lot of personal connections. That's why they like operating solo, right?
If you had to flip a female asset, would you rather have sex or money in your back pocket?
Money.
Money, yeah.
Money. And you're also talking
I'll put
about a female asset would only be a non-American asset because CIA doesn't recruit Americans.
Right.
So when I think of a foreign asset, the vast majority of what foreigners are looking for is solutions that can be reached with money, more so than solutions that can be reached with sex. Even then, let me just give you a real world example. Even when an American intelligence officer is developing or engaging in an operation against a foreign target of the opposite sex, when that target shows a sexual or romantic interest in the officer, it is critical that we don't reciprocate that romance or sexuality, that instead we find a way to confront them in a caring, loving, like in a caring, meaningful, transactional way, and paint the way for how their needs for connection will be solved with money. With financial stability, you can find a reliable partner. With financial stability, you can afford to buy a wife or buy a husband. With financial tools, you'll be able to gain enough notoriety or fame that everybody will want to be with you, right? Rather than engaging in any kind of romantic relationship that compromises the officer to the case.
Why is it considered that sex compromises the officer?
And two reasons. One, because American culture is a culture of sexual repression. So when we engage in sexual desires, it is usually because we feel guilty about exercising those same desires in our normal life. So we have to understand, and part of our training helps us understand our own vices. So when you understand your own vices and you see your own vices at play, you're like, oh, if I go down this road, it's what we call a slippery slope. If I go down this road, I'm just going to slip further down the slope and slip further towards compromise, and then only bad things happen. So that's one part of the reason why we do it. The second part of the reason why we don't engage in sex, or why we see sex as something that's compromising, is because it doesn't allow us to institutionalize the case itself. It makes the case dependent on the person because it's a romantic transaction, rather than creating a reliance between the target and the institution that is CIA or that is American national security. As long as you can institutionalize the case, it means that case has longevity. Because one day I will leave this country and you will come into this country, and I need to make it so that the loyalty is to the institution, so that when you take my place, the asset keeps working with you.
That's really interesting. If somebody were an external agent were trying to flip an American woman, money, sex, or love?
That's connection. We'll replace love with connection. The reason to go back to your original question, the reason that spies have the best sex is because spies actually understand the value of connection, true connection. Connecting sexually is just the most basic physical representation of connection. Transparent conversation, being able to demonstrate vulnerability, true vulnerability, being able to invest fully in the hopes and dreams of each other, right? These are all ways that we're taught to understand human beings, and then we just bring that into sexual relationships. One of the things that's the saddest thing to see is when CIA officers have a hard time ending up in a loving and meaningful relationship because the partners that they pick become intimidated or scared away by the level to which that CIA officer is able to engage in a relationship. Because they're able to get so deep so quickly if they choose to, or they're able to make it feel like they're so approachable and so accessible and so whatever else that the other person becomes inherently distrustful. So it's very, very difficult, and it's very sad to see, some of my closest friends have been just so talented in everything about their career, and they've struggled in love. And it just creates a very lonely existence for them. But yeah, so when it comes to a foreign asset, converting an American female, I don't know that it's fair to create a generalization of American females. But what I would say is that American females are far less susceptible to sexual honey traps or what we call sexpionage than American male targets. American male targets are far more susceptible than American female targets. There's always going to be exceptions, but probability-wise, if you're going to use a honeypot, it's very easy to test a honeypot against an American target that's a male versus test it against an American female target.
Have you heard of the book Rise and Kill First?
No, but I will write that down.
Brother, like I'm shocked that you weren't consulted on it, so it's about the Mossad. And it comes from a proverb in the Bible that if a man is coming to kill you, you should rise early and kill him first. And it just tracks her whole thing. And anyway, in the book, they talk about the 3 Ps, which I'm now forgetting. But one of the Ps, in terms of how you get an agent to flip and give you information, one of the Ps is another name for a cat, or how you call a cat a kitten, which I think everybody will immediately understand what I'm talking about. So yeah, I was not surprised by that. Like
Mossad are one of the best in the world at honey traps.
Really?
Against American targets specifically.
Interesting. Why would they be working against American targets? So we go after allies.
Yeah. And allies all go after the United States. That's the problem with being the biggest. Right? We had major flaps in France and Germany. I mean, just in our adult lives, right? Remember when Angela Merkel discovered that Obama's NSA was spying on Germany, and it caused a huge rift, right? Like it happens. One of the biggest, most public cases of American espionage was a naval officer that was recruited by Israel and giving away nuclear secrets about submarines.
And was it sexpionage?
Nope. In that case,
really? In
that case, he was Jewish, and they targeted him because he was Jewish.
Ah, interesting.
So that's not to say, again, it's not to say anybody's wrong. It's just to say that there is a leverage there that can be exploited. In some cases, it's ideology about your faith or about your community or about your value system. In other cases, it's ideology about what you believe is right or wrong, or who you believe is more powerful or less powerful, right? We have a saying at CIA that you are either in control or under control. There's no third option. So you are either in control of a situation, in control of your behavior, in control of your thoughts, in control of your outcomes, or you are under control of someone else's thoughts, someone else's behavior, someone else's plans, someone else's outcomes. It's up to you to ask yourself the question, which am I at any given time? And what steps am I taking to test that I am accurate in my assessment of my current status?
I like that a lot. Are there people that are unflippable?
Yes. I'm going to say yes. And when I say yes, what I mean is that the probability of them being converted is so small that it's not worth the investment of time and energy to try to convert them. But the truth is that we all go through points of our lives where we are more susceptible to being flipped than we would care to realize. And that's oftentimes what we're trained to do, is target those individuals who are going through that phase of life where they have the right access and the right life conditions, where compromising behavior is something that you can rapidly develop in them.
What are the right conditions for that switch to be rapid?
So there's major points in the typical life where you can anticipate financial needs, relationship needs, and health needs. Those are the major points that you want to look at. So think about your senior diplomat, your senior executive, your senior military officer who's a few years away from retirement, a few years away from no longer being relevant and no longer being paid by the state. Even better if they are working for like a third country or a competitor First Nation country where they aren't going to be taken care of financially very well in their retirement sunset years, right? But they're still 2 or 3 years out. It's a fantastic target because they have tons of monetary need. Same thing is true at the opposite end of the spectrum, where people are just starting out, but they don't have any financial, but they want to rush to their financial success, but they're not there yet. So they'll engage in compromising behavior, trading their information or their access in exchange for extra money, right? So you've got to always be looking for those points in a life where financial need becomes relevant. sick children, aging parents, changes in career, hitting ceilings of careers. Like these are all points that exist worldwide for all people, right? Then you have relationship issues. People who are old enough that they should be married, but they're not married, or they believe that they should be married, but they're not married, or they've been divorced, or they've been outcast, or they've been whatever else. They pick their career over their relationship, right? These are all people who are very susceptible to approaches that solve the relationship problem. Similarly, you've got the same thing that exists in the business world. People who are struggling in business, people who are trying to make a business, people who are trying to make a business that's super lucrative. They're missing certain elements in relationships. They don't know the right people. They're not connected to the right buyers, whatever else it might be. So it's a perfect place to step in and connect 2 points. And this person becomes wealthy because of an official business deal, but their loyalty is to you because you become their lead source, essentially, right? And then you've got health issues, and health issues they apply to the individual, but they also apply to the individual's family and friends and everything else. So if you are an Iranian, you have no access to Western medicine. So if you're an Iranian nuclear scientist and there's a rare eye condition in your mother, it's the perfect time for a Western power to come in and say, we have a hospital that can take care of your mother if you have a nuclear secret that you're willing to trade. And that's really how it all works. That same nuclear scientist 10 years earlier would have never talked to you. But today, right now, they will. There's so much marketing parallel between espionage recruitment operations and just standard business marketing. You've just got to give them the right message at the right time to get them to take the right action and then deliver the outcome.
No doubt. No doubt. Andrew Bustamante, where can people follow you?
You can find me on my homepage, everydayspy.com. You can find me on social media at everydayspy. And then if you want to find my podcast, I'm on all the major platforms and on YouTube. Thanks to Mr. Tom Bilyeu for recommending that last time I was here. And that's the Everyday Spy podcast.
Love it. Thank you for coming on. Everybody, remember, if you're not in control, you're under control. And speaking of things that will put you in control, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. Check out my conversation with Konstantin Kisin. He is one of my favorite people to talk to, and you guys will really enjoy this episode. If you want to be successful in life, it really will come down to the rules that you play by. For most people, society hands us a set of rules and we just accept them. That works fine in periods of stability and prosperity, but it becomes disastrous in moments